Calling to order the Board of Supervisors meeting for October 18th. Roll call, please.
Supervisor Brown?
Here.
Supervisor McCowan?
Here.
Supervisor Pinches?
Here.
Supervisor Hamburg?
Here.
Chair Smith?
Here. I'd like to go to our public defender for the Pledge of Allegiance, please. I pledge
allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
This is the time that we have public expression, and this is for any item that is not on today's agenda. And I have two slips thus far for public expression, and I'll go first to Victoria Britton.
Good morning. My name is Victoria Britton. I'm reading a letter from Pamela Patterson, the CEO of West Company. Pamela Patterson wanted to update you regarding the CDBG application for microenterprise that was not funded. Craig Schlater from CDC, Program Administrator for the county, and Pamela Patterson attended an exit interview provided by HCD's representative, John Almanza, to learn what we could have done better to receive the award. The program design and the outcome design received 90% of the points for that category. The basic reason for not receiving the award was due to the competition from other jurisdictions that have 30 to 50% unemployment or poverty. Since this meeting, HCD has redesigned the rating and ranking for economic development awards. There's less emphasis on unemployment and poverty rates and more in projects or programs that address the state and local economic development plans. Jurisdictions are waiting for the final word on this from HCD and HCD's development of a supernova due out in January. This supernova encompasses all of the CDBG programs funded by HCD. Mendocino County will be limited as to what programs can be applied for on an annual basis. Decisions will need to be made based on the priorities of the county. West Company can only follow the process in hopes that the county finds business and self-employment development a priority for the economic health of the community. Thank you for listening.
Thank you. Linda Thompson.
Good morning, Madam Chair, Supervisors, Linda Thompson, Public Defender, Mendocino County. I'm here asking that the board defer any presentation on Laura's Law for a few more weeks and not to go forward next Tuesday, the 25th. I want it to be very clear that this is in no way an effort on my part to bury or hide the issue of Laura's Law. I know it is in the forefront, but I feel it is reasonable and rational for me to try to gain sufficient time for Stacy Cryer, HHSA Director, and myself to adequately prepare for an informational presentation of Welfare and Institution Code sections 5346 through 5349.5. It is imperative that when emotions are running high and the public is demanding things to be done a certain way, that responsible policymakers ensure that they receive the most accurate, thorough, unbiased information about those issues that will truly allow the educated weighing of pros and cons on that issue. It's my understanding that Mr. Eister has already sent a letter to the board asking for a deferment on this issue until his investigation is completed on the officer-involved shootings on the coast. I am joining in that request so that I can assure myself that I am best prepared to provide this board with the informational and educational content that would allow the board to think about what direction it wishes to take on this issue. Ms. Cryer and I take this responsibility very seriously. I want the board to know that I am educating myself from other jurisdictions as well as reviewing the statutes very carefully. I assure all of you that this will be informational. I will not be an advocate for a pro or con. I am just asking for more time to be allowed to actually get that information and provide that to the board. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else for public comment? Okay, seeing none, we will go on to agenda item number 4. This is the approval of minutes. We have 3 sets of minutes, and we have a revised set for September 27th, provided to the board after the publication date. 2 board members, Supervisor Brown.
Thank you, Chair Smith. I'd like to move approval of the minutes as listed on the agenda, September 27th, October 4th, and I don't think the special session was in there.
We have the 4th. Yes, we do have the special
Yes,
session.
it is. Okay, and October 11th.
I'll second, and that includes the revised version of.
That is correct.
Any comments or discussion? So we have a motion by Supervisor Brown for approval of all 3 sets, including the revised set of September 27th, and a second by Supervisor McCowan. All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Hearing none, passes unanimously. Let's go now to the consent calendar. This is agenda item number 5. Supervisor Brown?
Thank you, Chair Smith. I would like to pull consent item number F for separate consideration and discussion.
Okay, item number F has been pulled. Supervisor Pinches.
I'd like to pull items K and L for maybe actually some questions I have on it. Maybe the Department of Transportation
Okay.
will come in a little later. That's K and L.
Okay, and now Supervisor McCowan.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'll move approval of the consent calendar with the exception of items F, K, and L.
Second.
Yes, and I also would like to pull item number C for presentation, but we'll send it forward for approval as well.
Well,
So-
but we can vote on those and then you'll make a presentation.
Just what I said,
Right.
yes. So K and L and F have been removed. All those in favor? Or first I'll go to any public comment, and I believe we do have one person for public comment on consent. Anita?
Board. I'm here in support of the proclamation for Domestic Violence Awareness Month. And I just had a few words to say. I feel that in a time when our economy is stressed and crime is on the rise, that linkage between agencies is important in order to connect services and fill gaps, which allows agencies like Project Sanctuary, Tribal Advocacy Centers, and Victim Witness the ability to be united and provide social and professional assistance on a level that establishes a safe relationship for the victims of violent crime that we serve in this community. It also allows us the ability to provide emergency support services in times of crisis, trauma, and need, with the ultimate goal being to see justice served and our victims empowered and made whole again. And I'd like to thank the board and the community for its continued support of all of our agencies and hope that that remains in the future. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So we'll go forward with the approval of the consent calendar now, and this is for all items with the exception of K, L, and F. All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Hearing none. Yes.
And I'm sorry, I know Supervisor McCowan made the motion. I didn't get the second to that.
No, Supervisor Brown made the motion, and Supervisor
No, I made the
McCowan made the
Supervisor
second.
McCowan made the motion, I seconded on that.
Thank you.
Oh, you did, okay, sorry. Sorry on that. That was on, I'm back on the other item, that was on the minutes.
Right.
Thank you for that clarification. Okay, we'll move forward with the presentation. This is for the adoption of proclamation in recognition of Domestic Violence Awareness Month, and Supervisor Hamburg will read the proclamation.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Whereas October 2011 marks the 25th annual commemoration of National Domestic Violence Awareness Month, whereas home should be a place of warmth, unconditional love, tranquility, and security, but for many Americans is tainted with violence and fear, and whereas every woman, child, and man in America has a right to live free from violence in their homes, neighborhoods, and communities, And whereas children who are subjected to domestic violence often grow up to inflict violence on others, creating a cycle of violence that must be stopped. And whereas domestic violence is a public health issue that impacts people of all races, ages, income levels, and gender. And whereas the U.S. Department of Justice estimates that 1 million women are victimized by domestic violence each year, with less than half of all crimes actually reported. And whereas efforts to end domestic violence require collaboration and commitment from criminal and juvenile justice agencies, victim assistance organizations, physical and mental health care organizations, legal communities, schools, social services, and civic and community leaders, as well as the strength and courage of survivors. And whereas continued education and intervention efforts improve public awareness of the severity of domestic violence, help to prevent violence and reduce the related cost to society, and whereas this annual month of awareness and commemoration is an opportunity to recommit ourselves to the values and beliefs stated herein, and whereas annually Project Sanctuary shelters almost 100 women and children combined, including approximately 3,500 nights of safe shelter, receives over 500 crisis calls, holds close to 750 individual counseling sessions, counsels over 300 people in support groups, assists over 350 people to obtain temporary restraining orders, and provides prevention education to preschoolers, kindergarten through the 12th grade students, as well as for college students and other adults in our communities. Now, therefore, be it resolved that in honor of those who have survived domestic violence, in remembrance of those who have not, and in gratitude to all who devote themselves to ending domestic violence, the Board of Supervisors of the County of Mendocino hereby proclaims October 2011 as Domestic Violence Awareness Month.
Thank you, Supervisor. Would you like to go ahead and do the presentation? We have Project Sanctuary staff here, and I believe we have time for a few comments.
Good morning. My name is Dina Polkinghorn. I'm the Executive Director of Project Sanctuary. I wanted to let you know that Mendocino County hosts one of the oldest domestic violence agencies in the state. There's about 90-odd agencies in the state, and we're about the 5th oldest one. So you're to be commended for that, for supporting us for so long. Over the years, we've developed over, I think, 32 operational agreements with various agencies in the county, and Mendocino County, by all means, is probably the most extensive relationship we have. We work with the Sheriff's Office and Health and Human Services, and we have a huge referral service, so we very much appreciate all the support over the years. And I thank you very much for the proclamation. I'd just like to add that the color of National Domestic Violence Awareness Month is purple. So if you see some of us rocking the purple, Ms. Angelo, thank you. That's why. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Dina. Would you comment briefly on the clothesline project? I was on the coast yesterday, a beautiful sunny day for most of the day, and the clothesline display was on 3 sides of the building. It was really remarkable, and folks were stopping to actually take a look at that. So if you would just comment really
Sure.
briefly about that project that's gone on for a number of years.
Yeah, it's a very impactful project. It's the idea behind it. It's a national project, and it's to air your dirty laundry, so to speak. And so we allow victims and family members and friends of victims to decorate a T-shirt to express what they've gone through as a victim. And some of them are quite moving, for sure. So we display the T-shirts every October in different ways. We've done it throughout the past in county buildings and at the City Hall and in our offices as well. And we invite anybody to come by and look at them. They're out in the lobby in our office at 564 South Doris Street and at the coast as well. I should mention too, there's an article in the Journal today which gives a more extensive sort of status quo of where we're at as an agency right now. It's a great article. I would recommend people check it out. So.
Good. Thank you for being here today.
Thank you so much.
Let's move forward with Supervisor Brown as a request to have item 5F discussed.
Thank you, Chair Smith. In going over the items for consent, I came upon item F, and it is an agreement between County Planning and Building. The dollar amount is $97,616, and it is to develop a sustainable land use code and stormwater ordinance. And it was a grant that was applied for by Health and Human Services Agency, Community Health Services. There hasn't been any previous board or board committee actions, says none. I would just like to have some more detail on that particular item and ask staff, I know they're present, to address it.
Thank you. Stacy Cryer, Health and Human Services Agency Director. You're correct. Health and Human Services Community Health Services branch got a grant from the California Department of Conservation. And the objectives of that money, it's a 3-year grant cycle, and the objectives are to develop plans that reduce greenhouse emissions, improve air and water quality, promote public health, promote equity, increase housing affordability, revitalize urban and community centers, protect natural resources and ag lands, and it goes on and on, protect water conservation. There's many objectives to the money. And it is designed to increase collaboration between the health component of the land use policies and the actual land use policies. As you remember, the last time a general plan went forward for this county, there was a health component in our general plan for the first time. And one of the things that we were talking about with the planning and building department was the need for, their identified need for more community process around the stormwater ordinance and around incorporating the land use code and the general plan together. So we negotiated with planning and building, and a portion of this grant is going to them to help them with funding for doing that community process, and for us to help them along the way on that community process. As you know, the stormwater ordinance has a lot of attention, and we want to help gain the community's input for them. So that's what it's designed to do. That's the intent. If you want more specifics on exactly how they're going to do that, Nash is here and wants to talk.
Thank you.
Members of the board, Nash Gonzalez, Planning Building Services Director. We've gone through the stormwater ordinance already. What this land use code is intended to do is to simplify the process as far as zoning. Okay, what we're doing here with this land use code, as we call it, is we will incorporate many of the different sections of the county code into one easy-to-use code. So when you see stormwater ordinance, the stormwater ordinance will be wrapped into the land use code as a chapter, rather than it being a standalone ordinance out there. So we'll have a zoning ordinance, we'll have a subdivision ordinance or a division of land regulations. We'll take the section of the county code that deals with agricultural preserves, TPZ, surface mining, and roll it into one code because it's all affecting land use. And so that was the purpose. And then just to give you a brief history, we were awarded this grant back in December of 2010. 50 counties and cities were awarded these grants for a number of different things, for zoning ordinances, general plan updates, master plans, climate action plans, and so on. There were hundreds of cities and counties and special districts that applied for these grants. We were one of the fortunate ones. Why? Because we collaborated with Health and Human Services, and it's also collaboration with the city of Ukiah, the city of Fort Bragg. So in order for us as a group, as a county, to receive any type of funding, we had to go out there and collaborate with our partners, because they're going to be doing their climate action plans, we're going to be doing our zoning ordinance, public health is going a health assessment, so we combine forces to do this. And Stacy is correct, the general plan does have a health element to it. There are a number of policies and goals that are set forth that would promote sustainability, and that was one of the reasons why we were awarded this grant. Also, when I first came before the board almost 3 years ago, we talked about fiscal responsibilities, we talked about how we could move away from the general fund and look at grant funding for a lot of our planning projects, and that's really why we're here today. And the agreement is between Health and Human Services because they are administering the grant for us.
Is there a report, a written report that gives us detail? Well, the detail that you both have, how you're going to use the money, and the details you've given us right now.
Well, we have the grant application that we could certainly forward to you.
Okay.
I have a summary of that. Sorry, is that better? We have the grant application that you certainly could look through. Also, I have a summary of that grant that I could give you. It's a really brief summary. I could beef it up if you needed me to. And then there's also the MOU between Building and Planning and Health and Human Services. Health and Human Services for the last 3 years has really been working on sustainable communities, built environment kinds of projects, and has been getting funding from the California Endowment, which put us in a good position for this type of funding as we move forward into looking at the health impacts of the land use code. So I could summarize, I can give you this right now, and then I can get you more information if you would like. There are several components. One's with the city of Fort Bragg, one's with Building and Planning.
Well, and I'd like to better understand it so I can answer questions as we go down the road. And there wasn't a lot of detail in the actual contract that we were signing to receive that grant funding. Although there were 2 pages of staff time, you know, the allocations. I just need it in simple terms, and I think that report will probably do it for me.
Okay, certainly.
Okay.
Supervisor McCowan.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Well, I think that this is not particularly time sensitive. This could be delayed a week and it wouldn't throw anything off.
No, but we're falling behind. We're already over a month behind on our internal schedule. But if the board needed another week, that would be fine to do this. But we're already, we should have started this back in August.
Well, my only concern is we have had some communication from the public, and a lot of people are sensitive to anything that has stormwater in the in the description. So if this did come back with the fuller explanation right up front as part of the agenda summary report, I think that might go a long way to allay people's concerns, or maybe not, but at least they would have the official explanation of what this really is, because right now they're filling in the blanks on their own.
And we can certainly do that, but I can tell the board now that what this does is this allows for the stormwater ordinance as written today to be incorporated into the land use code. Mm-hmm. And if there are going to be any new permit requirements coming down between now and 3 years from now, there will be funding through this grant to be able to pay for staff time to do any of these changes in the future.
And I just want to highlight it also allows the work to be done at a non-general fund expense. It's bringing grant funding into this community and into the Building and Planning Department, which has typically been a general funded or fee-based department. Mm-hmm. So it's actually a very positive thing. So if we haven't done a good job, you know, in our board agenda summary explaining the positives of that, then we can do that a little better.
Mm-hmm.
Supervisor Pinches.
So the work that we've already, you know, the stormwater ordinance is adopted, and there was considerable, actually, attorney time involved in doing that. So you're saying that we can take the general fund dollars that was put into the stormwater and use part of this grant to do that?
Let me address that.
Go ahead.
If I may, Supervisor, what it does is we'll say hypothetically if today this goes forward or next week, from that day forward we can bill any time to that grant. And so there will be, in the grant, there will be an allocation for county council's time. There is allocation for our staff time. There is allocation for staff in general to be reviewing, putting this thing together, and it will cover the cost. But the way the grant funding process works is once the agreement has been executed, then we can begin to bill from that point forward. We can't go back retroactively and pay for the staff time, but there will be a need for county council to do a legal review of the land use code. And when you're taking the stormwater ordinance and merging it into the new land use code, they obviously need to review that too. and that's going to cover that.
I just wonder, why would a grantor want to grant you money for something that the county's already done and adopted? But that's another issue. This is going to have a public process involved in it.
In fact,
how are you going to explain to the public out there, we're coming out here to you public to these meetings to get your input on basically an ordinance already passed? I don't think that's going to fly over too good with your public.
Well, what you're doing, again, is you may have certain rules and regulations that are still on the books today. For example, the zoning ordinance. There are some things in the zoning ordinance that aren't going to change either.
No, I'm talking specifically to the stormwater ordinance.
Is the same thing. It's going to be treated like any other ordinance, and it will just be wrapped into the code. So, for example, it will have some intricacies with zoning now. So that's where you get the public input.
So if the public input comes, and let's say the overwhelming public point out some issues in your stormwater ordinance that may be a good idea to change, will that come back forward for an ordinance revision, or is the ordinance in place set in stone? I mean, otherwise I don't see any sense in going out there and holding public meetings to ask the public about things if you have no intention to listen to what they say.
Well, it is a public process.
That's more less of a comment. It's not really, don't need an answer.
If I may, it is a public process because as part of the grant process, we are committed to doing a minimum of 4 public outreach meetings throughout the county. And again, it's how you incorporate, how you bring together all of the rules and regulations into one usable code. So that's the public input. And there are some things that do need to change in our zoning ordinance, in our division of land regulations. And how does the stormwater ordinance deal with zoning? How does it deal with division of land regulations? Those are the things that we have to look at. But we're going to take existing ordinances that are already on the books and basically update them. And ordinances that are currently updated at this point in time are just going to be melded into the existing or into the new code.
So, Mr. Gonzalez, since we're on the topic, I recall when we did pass the general plan, and I believe we also had a similar discussion with the Ukiah Valley Area Plan, that getting to some of the implementation phases was something that you addressed, and we had some specifics on, and that would follow the adoption of those 2 plans. And one was the zoning code, that we needed to do some changes relative to the 2 new documents we had just adopted. Mm-hmm. So is this grant providing us the opportunity to cover some of the funding to do that?
Yes, it is, because it's affecting the entire county, including everything within the boundaries of the UVAP as well.
So is it just, I'm just trying to go off the agenda summary we have here. So is it just really the stormwater ordinance component, or there are other aspects of the zoning code?
This is the entire zoning ordinance, the division of land regulations, the section on resource lands, and surface mining. It will take the entire, what I call Title 18, Title 17, Title 20, Title 22, and relook at that whole process and combine it into one code. Yeah. That's why it's called a land use and development code, because it looks at everything. It's very similar to what the city of Fort Bragg did, very similar to what a lot of communities have been doing, is taking all of their codes that deal with land use and combine them into one usable code.
Yeah, I think if we had just had some associated documents, as Supervisor Brown is talking about, that would have attached to this, that would have maybe sort of walked us through that, it probably, the clarification I think would have helped. But I really want to commend staff for actually taking the steps to go out and look for external funding sources to do things that we're mandated to do. So the fact that we're getting some amount of money from the Strategic Growth Council, something that I, was reviewing a number of years ago, thinking, gee, we ought to position ourselves to obtain some of these resources. And so you've done that. And so I think that's to be commended, that you've looked externally to get dollars from mandated functions. So I applaud you for doing that. We'll go to the CEO.
Madam Chair, thank you so much. That was part of my comment. What I'd like to say, though, is that the Executive Office will take responsibility for the lack of communication with this agenda item. Last week, I was out at a community meeting. I was asked to attend, and the issue of the stormwater ordinance did come up. This item, discussing this grant, did not come up on my part. I didn't realize this was coming forward this week, and I didn't share that information with the stakeholder group. So I think when it showed up on the agenda, obviously there was some concern about this coming forward, an item on stormwater, and the stakeholder groups not being aware of this. I think that's a perfect indication of why we're asking the staff to go back, clarify the agenda item, and bring it forward again. Additionally, I would like to commend the staff. I think that what Public Health and Planning is doing here is exactly what we want them to do, to maximize dollars, apply for grants, to assist us in doing processes that we need to do here that won't impact the general fund. So at this point in time, I will go ahead and work with the two departments as well to be sure that the agenda summary is adequate for you and for the community.
Thank you, Ms. Angela, and thank you both as well.
Thank you.
So let's go on to the other two items. I believe it was K and L
Yes.
for discussion.
Yeah. Thank you, Madam Chair. C. Howard Dashel is here from the Department of Transportation. Howard, I got first of all, on item 5K, the spending, it's kind of confusing on your agenda summary about, first of all, we done the capping of the Laytonville landfill as recently as about 5 years ago. And is this an engineering oversight, or is it, because it's not a slide or anything, why wasn't this part taken care of then?
It actually is a slide. There's a temporary cap. Laytonville is not final closed, it's closed, and a small portion of the dirt, the soil that's on top of the high-density polyethylene, was slipping in the rain a couple years ago. The crews covered it with some plastic. It came up on every year, Cal Recycle used to be the California Integrated Solid Waste Management, sends an inspector, and they walk the site and look at everything, and their indication there was they wanted to see that repaired more permanently. So there's some benches with drainage facilities that slow the water down as it comes down the slope. A couple of those, we're going to add some drainage there and try to stabilize that with some vegetation. That's really what the project is. Yes, but it is a small storm damage section within that cap.
So you have $200,000 budgeted, but the project's only going to be $60,000.
That's what I just wanted to make it clear that in the budget, when you look at it, I think someone put a pretty big number there. It was actually an item carried over from a year ago, but I'm letting you know I don't expect it to be that much. In fact, if it was under $30,000, we could do it with our own forces, but the uniform cost accounting, if it's over that, we have to go to contract.
You mentioned just a minute ago that the final, you got to do more on the final capping of the Laytonville landfill?
Eventually, we'll be into a final closure like we're beginning with South Coast. We're under order now to begin South Coast. You'll see a consultant agreement come to you probably in the next 2 months for South Coast, and that'll be a plan that makes the landfill more like Casper is right now, finally closed, final closure. That'll happen at Laytonville, I don't know when.
Is that major cost or minor cost?
Well,
because I was under the assumption Laytonville landfill was capped and closed and done deal.
It's not receiving solid waste. It is capped, but it's inspected every year, but it's not considered final closure. We're going to find out at South Coast how much more that is, and you'll get to look at those numbers, like I say, in a couple months. I don't know what it'll be at Laytonville, but those are really the two landfills that we're accumulating money in the landfill closure fund to do final closure on. We've been doing that now for, 10 years, I guess.
So what is there with the state to do this final closure? Is there a timeline set on that?
Well, fortunately,
I thought we had to be under a landfill plan for 30 years, but a closure plan. But isn't that clock still ticking at this point, or?
What they do is they knew that we needed to accumulate some dollars to actually do final closure. So what that's about. And so the Integrated Solid Waste Management Board has been monitoring, obviously, all our closed landfills. They inspect them every year. We have things in place that keep them stable and, not releasing any kind of pollutant. And, but eventually, once you get a final closure done, the idea is you're completely finished and everything is, really at that point we keep monitoring. But no, we're not considered final closed at South Coast or Laytonville. We're closed and we're monitoring and we have measures in place. But like Casper's finally closed, Potter's finally closed, Boonville's finally closed. Those landfills have all had final closure. Laytonville and South Coast do not at this point. I hope that answers it.
Yeah.
Okay.
We can do that one, and we'll move to the next one. I'll
Sure.
make a motion to,
Do you want to do them both together, or you want?
Okay, we'll go to the next one then. Item I. This is about, basically, for a small, and actually it looks like as far as your agenda is concerned, it looks like it's going to be several projects are going to do up to $85,000. Why? Because this is a process of a rating and ranking proposal. Why those are small projects. We have several consulting engineers in this county. Why can't we keep this stuff local? Why do we got to go to, I'm not saying that this is not a good company or even a better company in Sacramento, but all this stuff has to take an engineer stamp and be done. I just would like to see this work kept locally, rather than, I just think it's
the local firms compete for this. In fact, one local firm, SHN, has had some of this type of work, but we're obligated, and this is federally funded storm damage repair through the Federal Highway Administration. We're obligated to follow the Brooks Act, which basically says we solicit, openly and publicly any firm that wants to compete. The competition in the last 3 years with this recession has been intense. 7, 8, 10 firms competing, and they are selected on qualification-based selection. I have a panel of people rank them, and the fact that they're local or not just cannot be considered. I will add, though, the item before, the Laytonville item, where we'll be hiring this contractor to do the cap repair, the board's policy on the 5% preference can apply there because that's all county money. But for this item where we have the federal money, we just follow that qualification-based selection process, and that's why we don't necessarily get a local firm or we don't show a preference.
But when you do this, it's called a ranking and rating proposal. That's not strictly about the low bid. There's other ways to rank it. If it's federal money, I understand you have to go by the low bid. But
No, Brooks Act, you do not consider cost during the selection process. You totally look at qualifications, then you negotiate with the highest qualified firm. If you feel their cost is unreasonable, you go to the second highest firm, and you document how you do that, so if Federal Highways audits you, that's acceptable.
So can't you put in your ranking proposal, can't that step up for points in a ranking proposal? The ranking proposal is basically your own process, right?
That's correct.
So can't we give a little bit of notch up for local companies that even carry a business license in this county? We have companies operating in this county, they don't even buy a $40 business license.
I believe it's a condition of the county standard contract that they obtain that business license. So once they sign this contract, they'll be obligated to get a business license. As far as the ranking committee, they look at, I'm sure, local response or, availability to look at the site. They look at that when they do this ranking. But the idea of the Brooks Act is that you want to find the firm that's best qualified that has the best credentials to do the design work, because in the end, the public agency, and in this case, Federal Highway Administration, that's paying 88% of the cost, is getting the most efficient design, because the real savings is when you bid the actual work, that you have a well-designed public work to build. And that's the idea of the Brooks Act.
Yeah,
That's why they follow it.
But everybody that bids on this job, they're all licensed engineers. They all have the same, we talk about difference in qualifications. In my opinion, they all have the qualification. I mean, you can't say, if you're a licensed engineer in California, you can't say, well, he's not a good one and this is a good one. I mean, they all carry the same status as far as, so they're all qualified and they're all capable. And if something happens down the road, then that's more a civil issue. That's not an engineering issue. But when they put their stamp on an engineer, I mean, an engineer that's licensed in the state of California that lives in Mendocino County is just as capable as the guy that's licensed from Sacramento, you know. And so I don't know. I just think we need to do more to try to keep local dollars in this county, and in any way we can. I just seen this as an opportunity, but.
Well, I think the ranking committees look at all factors, and that might be one of them, as far, like I said, as far as response.
Maybe I need to be on the ranking committee.
But the actual, being a licensed engineer and land surveyor, I also know that in the code it says that I should not practice beyond the scope of my education or experience, which means even though I might have a stamp that would let me design any number of things, there are certain things I just don't have the education or experience to take responsibility for. And when you look at these different firms, they have different expertise and people with different experience, and that's why the ranking comes out the way it does.
Howard, I would agree with you on maybe big complex projects, but if you look at what you're doing with this, first of all, it's pretty minor, all minor projects. I mean, there's nothing with any particular expertise in any of this projects.
Well, that's particularly too, out of 37 difficult storm damage repairs from '06, I would say, and I'll look at Supervisor Hamburg, that the Great Walls of Comchi turned out to be the 4 that were much more complicated. Yes, most of them are rather routine, so we don't think about the 33 that went just fine, but and you know, I might add, I had a good geotech on those. They're just difficult. So some of them can be complicated, and you know, Federal Highways wants to see us have the best professional. They want to see that we've gone through a process that does give weight to the most qualified, the one with the most experience.
So returning to the board, do we have an action on these 2 items? A proposed action? Supervisor McCowan?
I will move approval of items K and L on the consent calendar, and I do appreciate Supervisor Pinch's raising the questions.
And I'll second, and I also appreciate the discussion.
As do I.
Can we take those, can we take those items separately for a separate vote?
K and L separately?
Yes.
The motion is amended to be an approval of item K.
Supervisor Brown, do you?
I concur.
Okay.
Second.
So we have a motion by Supervisor McCowan and a second by Supervisor Brown, and this is only for action on item 5K, consent calendar K, item K. Any public comment on this item? Okay, seeing none, returning to the board, all in favor, say aye.
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 Opposed? Hearing none, 5K passes unanimously. We'll go on now to item number L.
I'll move approval.
I'll second.
Again, we have a motion by Supervisor McCowan and a second by Supervisor Brown. Any public comment on this item? Okay, seeing none, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed?
No.
No.
So motion passes with Supervisors Pinches and Hamburg dissenting. So that completes our consent calendar for the day. We'll move on now to item number 6A, and that is the CEO's report. The board has received a written report. Ms. Angelo?
Yes, Madam Chair.
Yeah.
Good morning. Thank you. A fairly brief report today regarding the county budget. The books are closed for first quarter. We're working on our first quarter budget presentation for this board that will happen in November. We will implement this as we did last year with the analysis of the 1000 series and the budget adjustment. So I'm looking forward to first quarter because I'm curious as to where we are actually, considering we had balanced the budget and had some money for reserve. So I hope we're still balanced at first quarter. On this past Friday, the 14th, we held a conference call with Assured Guarantee. This is regarding our insurance necessary for refunding the COPs. We are moving forward with the initial steps we need to take before we return to the board. And yesterday, we also did a phone conference with Standard & Poor, and this is regarding our long-term credit rating. While the call went fairly well, I have to say that one of the issues that Standard & Poor had was our teeter plan, and there were multiple questions around teeter. And what was decided is that we would do a follow-up call with Standard & Poor, including not only ourselves and K&N, but also Galena, to talk about the audit regarding teeter and how teeter has been stated in the audit, not in the general fund, in the general fund, not in the general fund, and where the right place for teeter is. So I'm waiting to see how that phone conference goes, and then waiting to get our credit rating. And we should get our credit rating. This is, again, our long-term credit rating that we need for our certificates of participation. We had already done our short-term credit rating earlier in the year when we applied for our tax revenue funding. And so this credit report for long-term we should be receiving later this month, but we should get it within the next 2 weeks. Under executive office updates, Laura's Law, I believe we did have a speaker here at public comment on Laura's Law. What this board has directed is that there be a preliminary presentation on October 25th, and that also we do a full presentation in December. Based on what I'm hearing currently, the full presentation will be in December, and on October 25th, I will go ahead and include Laura's Law in my CEO report with any updates that we have from the staff. I do not believe that October 25th will be any action from this board, any decision making. It will not be an agenda item. It will just be part of my CEO report, and it will be an update to this board. And that we'll be halfway there. Retiree health update. Our human resources manager attended the October AMCRE meeting to discuss retiree health, and the AMCRE members did request a resource list of possible insurance brokers, and I believe that human resources will be providing that. I will be able to give you more updates on retiree health over the next few weeks. What we're looking at right now is the ongoing enrollment and how those numbers roll out. We have a legislative update, and I will defer to CEO Christy Furman on the legislative update. But under board updates and meeting highlights, October 25th, we have Assembly Member Wesley Chesbro coming. I believe it's at 2 o'clock in the afternoon. And then we do have our water agency workshop scheduled for early November. And we have received comments from some of our stakeholders in the community. I believe we'll be receiving more before that date. And then, of course, we still have the December 12th joint meeting of the Board of Supervisors and the Retirement Board. And unless there are any questions, that is my update for today.
Supervisor Brown.
Thank you, Chair Smith. Ms. Angelo, for the Laura's Law update that you'll be giving, will that be listed separately under the CEO's report or as a separate agenda item? And the reason I ask is because there has been a lot of communication from the public, and I just want the transparency and be able to inform those that want to come and listen.
I was planning on including Laura's Law as part of the CEO report. It would not be a separate agenda item. I think what we're looking at is understanding the public's interest and concern versus the multiple departments within the county that have to participate in any type of research, review, or implementation of Laura's Law. So I will include it as part of my CEO report. It will not be a separate agenda item. Unless I get direction otherwise.
The concern I think that I do have is I think the board is taking quite a bit of criticism because members of the public are feeling that this is being stashed behind closed doors. And I'm sure you've seen some of the emails and correspondence and also letters to the editor, different discussions on radio programs, etc. I feel it has to have more transparency, even though it's under your report as a preliminary. If we can list that separately under your report, I think it would go a long way to assure the public that we're certainly not trashing it, I guess is the best word to use.
Okay, through the chair. I agree. I am seeing the emails. I'm getting phone calls as well, and I know there is concern and interest from the public. I go back to Nevada County and implementing or enacting Laura's Law in 2002. Nevada County adopted Laura's Law in 2005, and they implemented Laura's Law in 2008. They are the only county to implement Laura's Law. So there are lots of reasons why an elected body like this that wants the information and has decisions to make, it just can't happen overnight. I know that staff is working on this. You saw that today. You've also received correspondence from other departments. There are a lot of different players. This is not just a mental health program. This is court ordered. This involves public safety. There are a lot of different facets to this. So you will get as much of a report as I can give you on October 25th. I assure you that staff is working on this, and as soon as they can, they will be back in front of you with the full presentation.
And Supervisor Brown, to your point, I think that we can figure out a way to make sure that we give a time to this so the public can know generally what time it will be discussed. So that can certainly help to accommodate that. But I believe, as the CEO said, this was not a deliberation or an action point, and it wasn't planned to be that.
That's right, Madam
It was an
Chair.
interim report scheduled for the 25th. The real discussion and potential action, perhaps, would be at the December meeting.
And I think that with the October 25th report, that if this board and the public understand the different components with Laura's Law and all the information that must be gathered, that could be explicit in the October 25th CEO report, so people understand what a perceived delay is on this topic.
Supervisor McCowan.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Well, Supervisor Hamburg and I originally asked that this be put on the agenda, and I certainly agree with you, Madam Chair, that when this does come back for the comprehensive discussion, it absolutely should be a timed item. My recollection is last week when the CEO report referenced all the steps that were going in to bring forward a comprehensive discussion. My recollection is I expressed some concern about that and wanted to have a presentation sooner rather than later, and I think that's where the statement was made that, well, we'll have the interim presentation. But I think that Public Defender Thompson made some valid points this morning. We have the letter from District Attorney Eister expressing his concern for what seemed a valid reason that he be able to be a part of all the discussions going forward. So I think it's appropriate, as the CEO has indicated, to simply have an update within the CEO's report on the 25th, and then we'll have the larger discussion when staff has had the opportunity to thoroughly research all the aspects of this, because I don't think it's going to serve us or the public well to have the discussion without having all the information available to us. So I think the and I believe you've expressed your support for that course of action, and I think that's appropriate.
Thank you, Supervisor. Supervisor Hamburg.
Yes, well, I agree with Supervisor McGowan. I do want to underscore one thing that the public defender said, which was that when she comes here for that meeting, which I guess will be in November, in December, that she's not coming here as an advocate. And I think one thing the public's concerned about is that there's going to be all this internal process, and then it's going to be presented as a fait accompli. You know, the county is for it or the county is against it. And I think that if we kind of keep it in the spirit that the public defender presented this morning, that, you know, we're going through an internal process to kind of ferret out all the pros and cons and all the, you know, all the nitty-gritty, if you will, of implementing Laura's Law, and that discussion in December will be an open discussion. It will not be a, well, you know, here's what the county's decided, and we hope you like it. So I just want to stress that I hope the spirit that the public defender defined this morning is the one that prevails at our December discussion.
Thank you. Anything else, Ms. Angela, on your report? Okay, then we'll go to 6B, and this would be to Ms. Furman on the legislative component.
Thank you. Christy Furman, County Executive Office. We are bringing forward any action for the board today just to highlight some recent developments at the state and federal level. With local issues, we have secured the presentation by Assemblymember Chesbro for the 25th, and Senator Noreen Evans is out of the country. We expect to have her presentation scheduled for mid-November as our target with the board. In 3 weeks, the voters will vote on Measure A locally to consider a sales tax increase to fund library services. So that's coming forward. The other local activity has been with regard to the board's ad hoc committee to develop the 2012 legislative platform. There have been 2 meetings of the committee with a third meeting scheduled next week. We've decided to bring forward the interim report to the board at the November 1st meeting if there's time available on your agenda. That will allow the board to engage with Assemblymember Chesbro and have one more committee meeting prior to presenting the interim report. The issues happening at the state level primarily is the constitutional amendment ballot initiative being put forward by CSAC. They intend to release the summary and title to the Attorney General within the next week or so and move forward with a ballot initiative. The CSAC Board of Directors will be meeting December 2nd, I believe, for their next meeting, and if there's a direction to go forward, they intend to start collecting signatures as early as the next day. The challenge is they're anticipating it could be as much as $6 million to move forward with the initiative. Although they are continuing to have discussions with the governor and other stakeholders, there's concern that if they mix other issues, it could dilute the message from CSAC, and there is some risk with early polling that supporters of the constitutional protections are favorable towards CSAC. There's an anti-tax kind of mentality going on right now. So CSAC is considering with their executive committee whether or not to bring in other partners to reduce the expense to the county, to the county's members, or to go it alone. So they're pursuing multiple parallel paths while they're working within the deadlines of the process. If they do move forward and fund it independently, they anticipate that membership dues could increase between 15 and 25% next year to partially offset some of the costs of the process. The other CSAC update is that they're having a roundtable discussion next week in Sacramento of the medical marijuana roundtable discussion. And I'm not sure if our county council is still a party to that process.
Yes, I am, and I'm going to be taking Supervisor McCowan with me to the meeting.
Great. So there's information online and in the CEO report that demonstrates what that discussion will review. At the state level, the state controller released their revenue projections for September, and they were less than what was projected. So it's being watched very carefully because of the trigger cuts that may be imposed in December if the revenues do not materialize. And there are 3 stages of trigger cuts. If they are imposed, it would impact our library, some programs through the district attorney's office, as well as our Health and Human Services agency and their programs. The governor had his deadline last Monday for his signature or veto of the bills that were before him. There were several hundred that were still awaiting his action. There are lists of the vetoed bills available on the legislative website and also through the governor's office. He did veto a couple of bills that had been opposed by Mendocino County, AB 1220 and SB 931. We have some other information about the governor moving all of the ballot initiatives to the November general election, and so there is a fear that that voters will be overwhelmed by the number and volume of initiatives that will be put before the voters next year. So that's just something to keep our eye on. And then the state legislature did just announce the formation of the Joint Public Employees Pension Committee. They had pledged to convene a special select committee at the conclusion of this legislative process because they did not move forward on some of the pension bills that they had anticipated. There are 4 Democrats and 2 Republicans that have been appointed to that committee, and they'll convene their first meeting end of next week, I guess next Wednesday. With regard to items happening at the federal level, the super committee, with its release of their report and recommendations on November 23rd, there have not been any appropriations bills passed, and folks in Washington expect that there may be one massive omnibus bill with all of the appropriations continuing through a 1-year period. Right now we're working under a continuing resolution until November 18th. So all eyes are on the results of the super committee, the target of a $7 billion reduction in the coming year with $1.5 trillion over the next decade. So that's what's happening at the federal level. Are there any questions?
Supervisor Hamburg?
No, I'm sorry.
Just
Supervisor Pinchas?
Just that we got trigger cuts coming from the state, and trigger cuts coming from the federal government, you know. It's all right around the...
Kind of like having a gun to your head, isn't it?
Yeah, right, yeah.
Very much. The next year is not going to be any easier than what your board and the executive office have been bringing forward, working with departments, trying to how to manage. And
well, the state put in false revenue assumptions. I mean, they had no reason to put them false revenue. It just made it easier to balance the budget. But I don't believe there's anybody in Sacramento that even thought that those revenues were going to materialize in this economy. So, you know, they would just effectively put it off until the first of the year. And now they're going to have to face the music.
Right.
And if those are real revenue projections, then whoever made them should have been fired. Because nobody thought that they were going to be realistic. You got to be like our county here. We could have adopted our budget a lot easier if we'd have pumped up our revenues 20%. Easy to do, but you know it wasn't going to materialize.
And also in the report, there are 3 lawsuits right now against the state due to their budget that they passed, that they adopted. And then the governor's proposed budget will come out just a few months from now, and it will start the cycle all over again. So when your ad hoc committee reports to the board in a few weeks, you'll hear that it's going to be mostly about how do we advocate to preserve and protect most of the programs that we're already administering, knowing that we have billions of dollars worth of cuts that are coming.
And not counting the new program called AB 109.
Right. I wish we had more positive news to share. It's rather grim. Sorry.
Ms. Furman, looking at your notes on the federal situation, I know we're talking about the continuing resolution to fund federal expenses and that expiring. Targeted adjournment, it says here, for December 8th. In the past, I believe on more than one occasion, Ms. Cryer mentioned to us that the federal component of a number of the funding streams for health and human service programs might be in jeopardy for the next year. Would you be able to check in with her and then report back to us in the near future on what might those scenarios look like, if there's any kind of forecasting coming from any entities, and just give us a report?
Yeah, I'd be happy to.
Future?
And there was a recent committee hearing in the State Assembly last week about the potential impacts to California based on the deficit reduction measure. So I could certainly forward that information as well. There were some charts and a 2-page or 4-page narrative, so happy to do that.
Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you.
So let's go now to our 10 o'clock timed item. And this is an informational update on the Marine Life Protection Act initiative for the North Coast Study Region, current implications and proposed actions for Mendocino County. And sponsors are Hamburg and Smith. I'll go to Supervisor Hamburg to introduce that item.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. I think all I want to do is introduce Janine Pfeiffer. I see that Jim Martin is also in the audience, and these are two consultants that the board hired to work with us as the Marine Life Protection Act initiative moved along. And there's been some activity on this front. I think recently there was a hearing in Fort Bragg on the CEQA component. There have also been some lawsuits that have been filed with respect to the implementation of the marine protection areas. And so I thought it was a good time, and the chair agreed to have Dr. Pfeiffer come and talk to the board, update us on what is going on around the state. And I'm glad that Jim Martin, who is also the chair of our Fish and Game Advisory Committee, was able to be with us today as well. So, Dr. Pfeiffer.
Thank you. Board of Supervisors and members of the audience, it has been a significant period of time since I updated the board, so I do have several issues, and my comments will be augmented by Jim Martin because there are certain things that I specialize in and other things that Jim specializes in. One thing I wanted to note for everyone is that as I've gone to the Department of Fish and Game Commission meetings this year, I've been to 5 commission meetings. There appears to be a disturbing trend following what was a consensus-based process here in the North Coast region towards non-inclusive decision-making. And essentially what that means is there is a very high potential where if you're not in the inner loop, if you are not present at the commission meetings, if you're not on the inside track of knowledge, that decisions that will either ignore or erode or overturn consensus-based decisions by our constituency are taking place or are being brought forward. And that's frustrating because an enormous amount of time and effort was put into this regional stakeholder group process. So to then see these meetings where they're held in Sacramento and Redding and Monterey and Southern California and Folsom, where our constituents are not present, or for the most part are not present, to have their hard-won decisions being eroded. So that is a reason why myself and Jim Martin and a few other people have been paying out of pocket to attend these meetings and to be present. What I can say is that during the February, April, June, and August meetings on MLPA, the primary focus was on tribal issues. And 2 positive developments that have come out of this Marine Life Protection Act initiative for our region is our tribes and tribal communities have come together in a way that they've never come together before and are becoming a very powerful political force, which is, in my opinion, very exciting to see happen. And secondly, we have what's colloquially known as the Tri-County Working Group, also known as the North Coast Local Interest Coastal Coordination Committee, but that's essentially a regional coordinating body, a voluntary body, to which the Mendocino County Board of Supervisors have signed on. And this group is also working in concert. And that's also, I think, a very powerful political body because it's demonstrating that we can continue a collaboration for a lengthy period of time. So what has occurred over the 6 to 7 months in relationship to the tribes is that the Department of Fish and Game just issued a report, a staff report that is being considered in their meetings tomorrow, the 19th and the 20th. It's dated the 27th of September, essentially recommending that tribal take in marine conservation areas, so not reserves, but in marine conservation areas that were included in this MP array, be allowed for tribes that submitted factual records and that submitted them within a certain deadline. It's primarily federally recognized tribes. For Mendocino, most of our tribes and tribal communities were grouped under the Intertribal Council on the Sinkyone Wilderness. And so that includes the Pinoleville Pomo Nation, Potter Valley Tribe, Redwood Valley Band of Pomo Indians, Robinson Rancheria, Round Valley, Scotts Valley, and Sherwood Valley, Hopland Band of Pomo Indians, Coyote Valley Band of Pomo Indians, and the Caddo Tribe of Laytonville. So all of those tribes were included in the recommendations that they be allowed to take within the SMCAs as long as they possess both a tribal ID card, Department of Fish and Game permit, and that their take is consistent with existing DFG regulations, and that they are not accompanied by anyone who doesn't have a tribal ID and a Department of Fish and Game permit. So the word that I heard from internal DFG staff is that probably this is going to be voted through by the commission. So it was a bunch of legal hoops, which do give preference to federally recognized tribes, and how that's going to impact on non-federally recognized tribes or on tribal peoples who do not belong to a federally recognized tribe is yet to be determined, and is a concern that I raised at the last Department of Fish and Game Commission. The other two issues that are going to be discussed on the 19th and 20th at the Department of Fish and Game Commission that relate to our county. First of all, defining what take from shore means for an MPA initially known as the Vizcaino MPA, now called the Double Cone Rock SMCA. So the staff is recommending that take from shore means take of living marine resources from shore, including beaches, banks, piers, jetties, breakwaters, docks, and other man-made structures. So essentially no vessel or watercraft or floating device be allowed in this SMCA. So that's one definition that they will be voting on the 19th and 20th. And then the fourth issue is abalone take using float tubes. The commission will be voting on whether or not it considers it permissible for abalone to be harvested using float tubes. So that's going to be voted on the 19th and 20th.
Dr. Pfeiffer, before
yes.
you continue, Supervisor Pinchas has a comment or a question.
Yes.
I appreciate, I'm just speaking in particular of one tribe like the Round Valley tribes.
Mm-hmm.
You know, if they basically going to allow to use their historical areas,
Mm-hmm.
but in some of these areas, because of the park closures, they're cut off from the land to even
Mm-hmm.
get to the ocean. How's that
Mhm.
going to work? I mean, you hear one state agency says, oh yeah, you can use these historic tribal fisheries areas,
Mhm.
but then you have another state agency saying, oh no, we can't allow you to get even to the ocean because the park's closed.
Precisely. And I do not know the answer to that question, and that actually leads me to another issue. And this is brought up by Larry Knowles on the 29th at the CEQA meeting, where our regional stakeholder group decided not to include most of the existing conservation areas in their proposal. So for example, McCarricker, Russian Gulch, and what was the third one?
Van Dam.
Van Dam, yeah, McCarricker, Russian Gulch and Van Dam. It was recommended that those conservation areas not be included in the proposal. So
But,
that
I mean, you have to give them access to their
Yes.
historical areas. I mean, so this is a question that needs to be answered.
Yes.
And right away.
What I will do in order to answer that question is I will contact both Hawk Rosales, who is the representative for tribes in our region, and then the lawyers for the Yurok tribe, who have been leading the way in this, and ask them how they are proceeding on that. Because part of what's happening between the commission meetings is there's a lot of teleconferencing going on between the Department of Fish and Game and tribal representatives. Because
once more, I mean, if you tell, like the Round Valley tribes, oh, you can do your fishing in the historical areas,
Yep.
but oh, by the way, you can't get access to the water.
Yep. Can you give me a specific example of a location where that's a problem?
I think it's up around Westport.
Would it be that Westport Union
I think it is, yeah.
State Park?
I've had a couple of tribal members in Covelo complain to me about it, you know, it's like they can't even get to the ocean.
Okay. Thank you. What would help is if we knew of specific instances where that's occurring, and then we can directly contact the Department of Fish and Game and
If
ask
you
how they're going to work
contact Round
that.
Valley tribes, I'm sure
Okay.
they could, you know.
So it's only Round Valley Tribe that you've heard that from?
Yes.
No one
Well,
else?
they're the ones from my district, so.
Okay. Have any of the other
Supervisor
supervisors heard of
Yeah.
concerns?
Ginny, it seems to me excuse me, another person that would have information specifically about Westport would be Lauren Rex, who's the new superintendent for our region, because Supervisor Smith and I had a meeting with him recently, and I think Westport Landing, they were talking about leaving it partially open, closing about 2/3 of it, but that would afford access through the part that they're hoping to keep open.
Lauren Rex,
So
how's the last
Lauren,
name spelled?
Lorenrex.
R-E-X.
Yeah.
Okay, that's the new superintendent of
And
parks?
he's at the Point Cabrillo office for state parks.
But that area has been the historical fishing grounds of the Native Americans in Covelo for
Yep.
since Jesus was riding a bicycle.
Yep.
Anyways.
Yeah, and that's a good example of how inland tribes and tribal communities are equally impacted by what happens on the coast. So it's, initially folks were assuming, oh, if a tribe's not on the coast, then, what's the big deal? It's not
Don't
really
these state
a
agencies
concern.
ever have a meeting together and get together on some of these,
Only if they show up at each other's meetings. Pretty much.
Supervisor Brown.
Thank you, Chair Smith. And in
Yes.
response, I have a number of tribes federally recognized within my district, and I haven't heard anything, but I certainly appreciate what Supervisor Pinch has brought up.
Okay. Thank you. Well, something that I will do is I will both contact Lauren Rex. I will speak with the Round Valley tribe directly, but I'll also do a check-in with the other tribes who are in other supervisors' districts and ask them, is this a concern and specifically where? Because what I've gotten from the Department of Fish and Game Commission is if we bring a concern, we need to actually identify the geographical location where that concern is taking place.
Okay.
So it does need to be specific. And thank you, Supervisor Pinches, for bringing that up. The Covelo tribes have not been very present at the Department of Fish and Game Commission meetings, so that's why I was not as aware of that issue as I should have been.
Well, that's the Native Americans still have a lot of distrust in state agencies, and it's kind of like their attitude is, well, they're going to do whatever they're going to do to us anyway. So, I really figure it's probably, they're not going to come forward, so it's got to come forward from this level. Because frankly, a lot of our Native Americans have wrote off our American style of government for the last 100 years.
I hear you, and I agree.
So it's hard to criticize them for not going to meetings when they've had no results.
I entirely agree, and that's part of why this tribal coalition that's formed in Northern California in response to the MLPA is so noteworthy, and why the presence of tribes and tribal communities at these meetings and consistently now for 2 years is truly astounding. And it's been very impressive. So the final bit that I'm going to speak on before I turn it over to Jim is during that CEQA comment meeting on the 29th, which was attended by less than a dozen people, half of whom were tribal members, there were specific comments by Larry Knowles, who is one of our regional stakeholder group members, and an artisanal seaweed harvester, who spoke up about the fact that state parks had been quiet, deliberately maintained a silence throughout the whole stakeholder process, and then at the very last minute said, oh, well, we want you to retain these conservation areas in your proposal. And I don't know what other constituent concerns might be, and again, I would expect Jim to speak to that. But one of the solutions that Larry Knowles proposed on behalf of the artisanal seaweed harvesting industry is just to restrict take on giant kelp only, because apparently it's in small quantities in these state parks. Bull kelp is in larger quantities. If the artisanal seaweed harvesters are able to continue harvesting that from these areas, then they don't see a problem necessarily with the existing McCarricker, Russian Gulch, and Van Dam SMCs being included. However, there has been a concern stated at a number of commission meetings that because there are so many state parks slated for closure in our county, and we already have not enough wardens to police and enforce these areas, how in the world are we going to be able to enforce marine protected areas in state parks following their closure? And we have not received a single satisfactory response to that in the meetings.
Supervisor McCowan.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Well, I don't know that the Native Americans feel that differently about trust in government than we do. You know, I think, frankly, we've been rather pleasantly surprised due to your efforts and the efforts of all the regional stakeholders that we've had the influence that we have in terms of a general acceptance of the unified proposal that was put forward. But going forward, I'm still a little doubtful how much influence we can really have in the process, because quite often it plays out that they do what they want to do. So what's your level of confidence?
Well, I think that's a really good question to ask Assemblymember Chesbro when he is here next week, because he and Senator Noreen Evans have been tremendous advocates for us. And you know, when in the past years we wrote letters, for the Fort Bragg City Council wrote a letter, and then the Board of Supervisors wrote a letter. It was then conveyed to Assemblymember Chesbro's staff and to Noreen Evans' staff. They then pushed that agenda forward for us. And they not only did it in meetings and teleconferences between commission meetings, but then they also showed up physically at those meetings. Mm-hmm. And so I've watched that happen again and again, and I've watched it actually readjust the process and readjust our ability to participate in the process. And I've seen it make an enormous difference in the Blue Ribbon Task Force. When they basically rubber stamped the unified proposal, and also in the issue with the tribes and tribal communities. Because when we started this process in July in Fort Bragg, I was sitting there when the MLPA person said, "Oh no, we're not going to talk about tribal issues at all. That's just not part of this process." I mean, that was our starting point. And another starting point was, "Oh, we're going to split you into these, you know, lovely little sapphire, emerald, ruby, you know, whatever groups, and you're going to come up with multiple arrays." That didn't happen either. And I think we can point again and again to how we changed how this process works, not only for our region, but for the entire state of California. So I have reason to feel very proud and wary at the same time.
And just for clarification, we're being asked to endorse Tri-County's letter to the CEQA scoping, but in fact that letter's already been sent.
Yes, and I did give Supervisor Smith some background on that, and I just want to reiterate that very briefly to you folks. The Tri-County Working Group did not meet in October. And because the chair of that group was suddenly removed from his position. There will be another meeting on the 10th. I understand that Supervisors Smith and Hamburg will be representing Mendocino County at that meeting. But because there was no meeting in October, it was more of, I'll use the word ad hoc informally. It was a small group of active participants who basically got together on the phone and over email and said, "We need to respond to this. We have a deadline on October 14th. And so we together put a call out to our constituents, pulled agenda items together that much of this is not new. Much of this has already been repeated again and again and again to the Department of Fish and Game Commission, but we've got a new regional manager for our region. We have new consultants. So the education process in some ways begins all over again. And so we spoke to issues including effort shift, including the concern over urchin barrens, the concern that the whole model that was used did not allow for sustainable harvesting, either by our artisanal seaweed harvesters or by our tribes and tribal communities or by subsistence gatherers. We addressed the economic concern that so large a proportion of our county in particular depends on ocean resources for their subsistence and for their survival. And we also address the enforcement concern, the tribal concern, and we want public input to continue to be maximized concern. So what we agreed, those of us who were pulling this letter together, was that we would send it as individuals who are participating in this Tri-County Working Group. We did not say we were representing the county or any entity, so that it would be entered into the public record. And then Supervisor Hamburg, I know, has made efforts to try and get the comment period extended, so that if the Mendocino County Board of Supervisors decides to endorse and adopt this letter as well, it will have the additional weight of the county behind it. So that is what happened. But we were just so pleased to get a letter out and similar versions of that letter from the 3 counties prior to the deadline, because we were given only 30 days.
And I'm fine with endorsing the letter, but one of my little pet peeves is the first use of an abbreviated title like BRTF. We should start with Blue Ribbon Task Force and then in parentheses. And
yep.
So the first use of some of the jargon spell out what we're saying, and that way people who are not totally plugged into the process will understand it if they happen to see it. And I am curious, under biological resources, the potential effects on ecosystem services. So in context, what does that phrase mean?
Thank you for asking. And the reason why the whole Marine Life Protection Act initiative was passed by the legislature in 1999 was because we, in the state of California, had such a piecemeal approach to reserves. It's like, we'll do a little one over here, we'll do a little one over here. But as ecologists and as biologists, we've learned that there are functions provided by ecosystems. So for example, marshlands and swamps serve to filter pollutants as they go through. That's one ecosystem service. Another ecosystem service is kelp habitat, providing shelter for fish and hundreds of other species, which then provides food and economic benefit to communities. That's another ecosystem service. And that in order to effectively protect our natural resources, we couldn't just do a species approach. That was very old school. New school is protecting an entire ecosystem, but again, not just a geographical or a habitat distinction, but the various functions and services that happen not only within that ecosystem, but when it's connected to other ecosystems. Mm-hmm. So that's why there is a lot of hard to sit through scientific presentations on genetic connectivity, because that's another ecosystem service that in order to conserve all the traits of species and populations that we want to see so that they can survive changes like climate change or like ocean acidification, you need a lot of genetic diversity. So that was another reason for why they were trying to model out the spacing guidelines, et cetera. So thank you for asking that question.
And maybe that's generally understood in the circles you move in, but to me, ecosystem attributes might be more descriptive. But
ecosystem services is the term, just like you say, okay. Biodiversity, it's
right.
Ecosystem services. And yes, it is something that my students are learning this week as well. So thanks for the reminder. And I'll turn it over to Jim.
Thank you. For the record, my name's Jim Martin, and I'm here as chair of the County Fish and Game Advisory Commission. And I'd really like to thank Janine. She's did apply for funding to keep working on the MLPA and keep the, I know that a lot of people in the community really appreciate the work that she's been doing. And our commission met last week in Fort Bragg, and we had a lot of discussion about what we're going to do with our grant program this year, because as you know, we had a lawsuit and an instigation of a DFG audit by Rod Jones of the Mendocino Abalone Network, and it's really caused a lot of questions about our programs. And so far, it looks like we're on track and everything's okay. But, excuse me. But the one thing that's remaining is that our secretary costs more than the state allows us to spend on overhead. And so I think Jeannie Roberts is getting a contract for about $3,500 a year to do all the work she does. And that includes, getting the grant packets out and putting things out in the media, making sure that the commissioners and the public have a copy of our agenda and so forth, and noticing everything. So we're really, kind of up against it, because that is part of the Fish and Game Code. And so at our last meeting, combining that with all the work that Jeannie would have to do to send out the grant applications and some revisions that we'd like to take a look at in terms of asking the grant applicants to identify which section of the Fish and Game Code their project applies to, that we'd like to take, either defer this year's grant program or kind of delay it a little bit until we can get the grant packet revised and the DFG audit is completed. So again, I think we're okay. We've been working with the county counsel's office, and they've done a great job in providing the documentation we need. So I just wanted to give you an update on that. And I am on my way down to the State Fish and Game Commission meeting where, we'll be testifying about these MLPA issues. And also, there's a proposal to reduce the annual bag limit for abalone from 24 a year down to 12, which would have a serious impact on our county because you're just taking trips away from people. And so we're not supportive of that because the data doesn't really demand it right now. And just for information too, the Sonoma County die-offs that you heard about on abalone seem pretty limited to Fort Ross, and it didn't affect Mendocino County. So thanks for your time, and I just thought I'd pass that along to you.
Jim, do you have any questions on the letter before us and the board moving this forward as a board action?
I don't. I think it's an excellent letter. I know that it's had a lot of input from people in this county and all 3 counties. So I think it really, basically what we're trying to do is set the scope for the CEQA analysis. That issue of the sea urchin barrens is a concern. Once you stop the commercial sea urchin guys from going in there and cleaning them out every once in a while, it becomes less diverse. You have a monoculture carpeted, and look, there's less seaweed and life in there. So it might be one of those unintended consequences that we'd like to take a look at. So I endorse it.
Thank you. Supervisor Hamburg.
Yeah, thanks very much, Jim. I wanted to ask Janine, what's the current status of the Resources Legacy Foundation Fund and Ken Wiseman? Are they still in the middle of this process?
To my understanding, RLFF is continuing to fund the process because their next region is the San Francisco Bay Area. And I've continued to see Ken Wiseman playing a prominent role in the DFG meetings and every meeting I've been to. And in fact, when I was at the Ocean Protection Council meeting in Oakland, giving testimony again on behalf of our county and noting that our county, this region, the Northern California coast, had no scientific representation on the Ocean Protection Council Science Advisory Team because there was no scientist with expertise in this area or resident in this area. Ken Wiseman was present at that meeting as well.
Okay. Because you brought up one of the real sticking points in this whole MPA establishment that's going on with this process, which is how are you going to enforce it? I mean, obviously the Department of Fish and Game doesn't have the wardens available, and there's been some talk that somehow there would be grant funding to provide enforcement of the marine protected areas. And I have a real problem with that. I think maybe a lot of people would have a problem with that, to be privately funded law enforcement officers. But I don't know where else the money is going to come from. And I think the whole idea behind the MLPAI is really compromised by the fact that there isn't the enforcement mechanism in place. Unless the governor, wants to put a tax on the ballot to pay for enforcement of MPAs, I don't really think we're going to see that. So, that's a real concern of mine. And I also, I just want to underscore what you said earlier about what's happened in our region, because I really think it's exemplary, and I don't think a lot of people really expected that these counties would come together with the Native Americans to the extent they have. And I think we have really kind of thrown a monkey wrench in the process in a good way. Because this issue you raised, which is one that I've really been concerned about, the non-inclusive decision-making, which was your term for describing what goes on at the Fish and Game Commission. And I think the North Coast stakeholders group has made clear that that isn't the way we do things up here, and we're not going to be compliant with that kind of a non-inclusive process. We insist that our voices be heard, and I think we've done a really amazing job of pulling together and letting our voices be heard in front of the commission, in front of the so-called BRTF, the Blue Ribbon Task Force. And I'm really proud of our region and how we've handled ourselves.
Thank you. And you did remind me of something that I'd like to insert as a placeholder for a later discussion. One recurrent theme that many of our constituents noted is that because Mendocino County residents feel passionately about our ocean resources and about our marine resources and about our wildlife and our coast, that we do serve as eyes and ears, that we are the ones who do look out for our resources. And you know, to be characterized merely as exploiters was a real affront, or as users was an affront to all of our constituents. And so the placeholder I would like to insert is, and I've talked with privately with some of the supervisors about this, is for the Board of Supervisors to put forward something akin to a resolution saying for any researcher or agency that comes in wanting to do research along our coastline has to have a local component, has to report into the local governing agencies, and has to actually hire local people. And that's something which addresses the employment concern, the reporting concern, the inclusiveness concern, the monitoring concern, and hopefully helps to ensure that we don't have that dichotomy between a privileged scientific class who comes in and everybody else who may or may not hear about what they're doing and how they did it. And so if we do have openness to that, I will, at a later date, draft that sort of language. But I will also vet that language with the scientific community so that it makes sense to them as well.
Supervisor Brown.
Thank you. This was timed for 15 minutes. We're well over that. I think we need to move it along and then have a 10-minute break.
Okay.
Thank you.
If I may, Madam Chair?
Yes, Supervisor Hamburg.
Yes, I'd like to move the recommended motion and just remove the language "and ad hoc oceans committee" or "by," and leave it through the inclusion of quarterly updates as a routine agenda item. And I will take responsibility for making sure that those updates come through, if not on a quarterly basis, at least on a regular basis as needed.
Second for discussion.
So we have a motion by Supervisor Hamburg with a slight amendment to the recommended action that was published. We have a second by Supervisor McCowan. So we'll go to discussion, Supervisor.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I would request to the maker of the motion that perhaps we just put a period after the portion establish regular updates on the MLPA to the board on an as-needed basis.
Not a problem.
Thank you.
Do you have that, Tim? Great.
Okay, we have a motion with a slight change that was approved by both the maker and the second. Let's go to public comment on the motion. Anyone wishing to address the board on the motion before us? Okay, seeing none. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? Hearing none, motion passes
Thank
unanimously.
you, Jim. Thank you,
Thank you
Janine.
both for
appreciate you coming in.
being here. So we'll take a 10-minute break?
Yeah, and thank you supervisors for having the update. It was very good.
And then we'll return with our next scheduled item. Supervisors returning after a brief break. We're going now to item number 8C. This is presentation of the efficiency audit of the Mendocino County Sheriff's Office prepared by Harris & Harris Enterprises and possible action regarding the March 2011 Board Ad Hoc Committee referral. This is coming forward to the board from the Ad Hoc Committee. That's Supervisors McCowan and Smith. So I think I'll go to Supervisor McCowan, and he can briefly introduce the item, and we'll go to the consultants that are here and to our CEO.
Well, thank you, Madam Chair. The ad hoc committee was appointed by the board, and of course, the board subsequently authorized the hiring of the consultant. And personally, I think the relatively modest amount of money has been well spent. We've received a wealth of information here. We have the consultants here to present. The board all has a copy of the report, and the purpose of this is to hear from the consultants and of course the sheriff, and to ask any questions that the board members may have. No action is contemplated for today. It's an informational presentation. Thank you.
Thank you. Ms. Angela, did you want to make any opening comments?
Madam Chair, I think we could go straight to the report.
Okay.
Okay, well, first I'd like to introduce myself and my partner here. My name is David Harris with Harris & Harris Consulting, and I have one of our senior partners here and a project team member, Steve Reeder. And we did the bulk of this, but also I should give recognition to Michael Harris, who also helped on this report. First, I just want to start off by thanking the board, thanking the CEO's office, Sheriff's office. We had a great deal of cooperation and collaboration in this report, without which we certainly would not have been able to get this thing done. And this was essentially like writing a book in 60 days. It takes a lot of effort from a lot of people to get something like that done, and we did get a lot of cooperation from everybody. The other thing that we would like to mention, starting off, is Mendocino is a unique county. It has unique geography and topography, and in fact, we were talking this morning at breakfast over this in the travel guide in the motel. It talked about that diversity in this county, and it actually has interplayed in this report and this study, and you're going to see that it requires a decentralization of services at certain times, and it's going to play an important factor in all this as well. Then finally, we'd also like to mention, when we did this study, we had a guiding principle, and that was to provide the best practices for public safety for the citizens of Mendocino County. And we know that there's times when statistics and data looks clinical, and it doesn't always directly relate to people, and we have people involved in here. We tried to keep that view in mind as well, and we tried to address what is the opinions and views of some of the people that are involved, because they're not just a number, they're not just a statistic, and so we hope that that was captured in this report as well. And then also that Mendocino County, like every other county, splitting the baby these days is the rule, not the exception. And it's very, very challenging for all the participants in this study to come to grips with that, and some of that I think is addressed in here as well. So with that, we'll move right on to the contract overview. And after that, I'll briefly talk about some significant recommendations. We think all of the recommendations have significance that we've made here. It's in the matrix that you've seen in the study. And we hope that due regard will be given to all of those recommendations. However, we're going to just go over some of the significant ones. And then, of course, we'll have a Q&A. That's a time available for you to ask us questions if you have any. The process that we went through in the contract, the scope of work really was to develop, that we developed and distributed and analyzed questionnaires used to identify organizational structures and workloads. And we did that through the online survey that was distributed to the participants. And then we met with county management and discussed staff workloads, staffing philosophy, operational issues, and managerial concerns. We met with knowledgeable groups and individuals, conducted interviews to obtain pertinent operational, workload, and statistical information. We collected and analyzed other pertinent statistical data relevant to required law enforcement service levels to Mendocino County. And we evaluated the current workload and services provided by the Sheriff's Office, including how staff resources are deployed and utilized. And then finally, this is not finally, but this is one of them, evaluated general operations and organizational structure for efficiency, made recommendations related to workload and available staff, discussed labor agreements for conflict with staffing and coverage, made recommendations related to best practices for areas determined to be suboptimal in staffing ratios, position allocations, efficiency, or high liability. And then finally, conducted a limited review of public safety technology that might provide improved service delivery or cost savings. And on this particular topic, we never purport ourselves to be experts at technology that's associated with this. He and I have both, in our previous jobs, helped implement technology into law enforcement organizations. As it happens right now, Mendocino County is going through the implementation of a new technology system, and if it lives up to what it says it's going to live up to, which is always a huge question with this stuff, there really should be some service delivery improvements and give the Sheriff's Office administration the ability to maybe make more informed decisions about deployment and staffing allocations. And then on to significant recommendations. I'd like to start first with command staff, and if I could draw your attention to page 25. A typical organization, like the Sheriff's Department, will have 3 divisions: field operations, corrections, and administration. Over that is typically an undersheriff and, of course, the sheriff. In Mendocino County right now, they have 2 captains, no third captain for administration, and no undersheriff. And we understand that the reasons for that, that's just the way it is right now. However, the distribution of how those are separated right now skews that 60% of those responsibilities towards the field operations captain. And if you look at, I believe it's page 29, it'll show you the field operations division and the responsibilities for him. And field operations, by its very nature, are somewhat complicated. There's a lot of structure to it. There's a lot of different things. And so that added responsibility, not just the complexity of what he has, but the added responsibility of it is difficult for one captain to manage. So of course, in a perfect world, we would say, hire another captain and an undersheriff. You know, that's something obviously that you guys struggle with and may not be able to do. Barring that, then we recommend a redistribution or rebalancing of those responsibilities. And we also acknowledge that the sheriff, may have other reasons to do something other than that, but that would be our recommendation. Management, and when we say management, we're talking about the middle management for the Sheriff's Department. Right now that there's a couple of acting lieutenant positions. In our experience, acting positions, either sergeant or lieutenants or whatever the case may be, is a temporary solution. Management, in our opinion, again, should be management and not necessarily line staff. And what we mean by that is lieutenants and above would normally be salaried positions. However, when you have someone in an acting position, they then have the ability to have kind of the best of both worlds. They get the pay of a lieutenant, but they also get the incentive pays, they get overtime and some of those other things that when you permanently keep them in this acting status might cost you over time, cost you extra money, and may be less efficient financially for you. So it's our recommendation that where you can, to make those acting positions permanent positions.
Supervisor McCowan has a question or a comment.
Well,
Yes, Madam
just
Chair?
a clarification, we have a PowerPoint that's included in our packet, and what you're going off of appears to be different than what we're going off of.
Yeah, we sent, there was a kind of a time crunch, and we sent a very simplistic version first, and we sent an updated version last, I believe, Monday morning. So I'm not sure what you were given.
Well, we don't,
Ma'am.
what,
Yeah.
we're not, I'm not looking at this.
Madam Chair,
Yes.
through you.
Yes.
If you sent us this PowerPoint, we'll go ahead and find it and make copies for the board and the public. This is the one that you most recently sent?
It is, and that's
Okay.
That's why you have
All right.
this here, is because we
We'll
sent
get
it
it
to
now.
you. So.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
We apologize for that. We're on to sergeants now and span of control, and if you could refer to page 34. This is another issue that you can apply hard numbers to if you want to, but that's just not realistic, and that's why there's just really a range of what you can do for span of control and supervision. One of the most important parts of it, however, is we believe that where possible, and as often as possible, sergeants should supervise people and not just programs. So a typical span of control would be something in the range of 1 to 5 or 1 to 8, in a typical law enforcement setting. The diversity of Mendocino County just does not allow that in some circumstances. You have to provide service level, service delivery to, for example, Point Arena. And there's such a small population there, but nonetheless, they still require service delivery. So because you have a sergeant down there and one person, one deputy sheriff, it looks like a 1-to-1 ratio. And that's rarely justified. If there is any justification in this organization, we would say that that's probably it. In fact, we were a little bit divided on that in the project team. However, it's a lofty responsibility that that sergeant has down there to be the liaison between the community and the sheriff's office, and that should, in all likelihood, fall to at least the sergeant. So that would be maybe the one case that we would agree with that.
David, also that having to do with the city of Point Arena, with that contract. So I think that when we look at that, generally when you have a contract, generally there is somebody at the supervisory level, management level that does report to that city council as part of that contract. And that's why that 1-to-1, we believe, works down there because of that requirement.
With that said, however, we think that there are some other areas where it's not as justified as that, and that would be the list that you see before you here, and that would be the Office of Emergency Services. These are not comments based on how well the sheriff does these things. In our estimation, the sheriff does them all very well. He does OAS very well and all of these things. However, Office of Emergency Services shows a span of control of 1 to 0. So you have a sergeant running a program but not supervising any people on a daily basis. There are events that come up where that sergeant would supervise a number of people, but that's not his daily operational mode. That would just be as events come up. We believe that there is a need for supervision in other areas of the department. So if you were to ask us, are there too many sergeants in the department, we would say no. However, there might be a reallocation or redistribution of how some of those sergeants would be deployed. We'll talk about some of those reasons, and I'm sure the sheriff has other reasons of why he does it this way. We are not necessarily dealing with the personalities and all the issues that may be involved with them. We're just looking at them from, this is one of those, a fairly clinical view of it. OES is most often probably found as a function of the CEO's office, or at least responds to the CEO's office. Some sheriff's department, like Mendocino County, has this responsibility and does the same thing. However, when you have one sergeant taken out of the equation, and you have a need, for example, in Fort Bragg of a sergeant, it's hard, to make that justification. In Fort Bragg, when we did the initial visits and the study there, and we know that there's been some changes since we first started the process, there were no sergeants. So you had a station with 0 supervisors physically at that station. We understand that the Point Arena sergeant would do some remote supervision of the staff up there, but that's one sergeant, one shift. Obviously his days off, he's not available. And of course they would provide some supervision from other parts of the county. But we are also concerned of an over-reliance on technology. We know that technology does give us an advantage, gives the sheriff's department an advantage in communicating by cell phone and by the video phone for briefing, those kinds of things. But again, we think that that should be the exception and not the rule. If you look at the published grounds for lawsuits in vicarious liability, one of them is inadequate supervision. So if an incident were to occur, one of the things, for example, excessive force, one of the things that will be looked at was there adequate supervision. And there would be times that would be difficult to show in these scenarios, in our estimation of it. So that's why we talked about some of these sergeants' positions, because we see a need in Fort Bragg, for example, and then other sergeants with a very low span of control. Since then, we've heard that the sheriff has made 2 acting sergeant positions there, and that's good because it provides the supervision that's needed there. However, of course, that's a net loss from deputy sheriffs because they're now sergeants. It's not a direct 1-to-1 loss because some duties overlap, of course, with the deputy and a sergeant. However, if one of these other sergeants that had a low span of control could be moved over to that position, then you have a gain back of that deputy sheriff.
Supervisor McCowan has a question.
Thank you. And I agree that direct supervision is the ideal, but even if you had a sergeant in Fort Bragg, and now we have acting sergeants. Because of the staffing and the geography, the distances they have to cover, necessarily you're not always going to have direct supervision. It's going to be by cell phone or dispatch, relaying messages, or some technological method. So what's your response to that? Aren't we always going to be in a position where we don't always have absolute direct supervision?
There are always going to be times in every organization where you're not going to have direct supervision on every call. That would obviously not function properly. But there are critical incidents, and there are some incidents where you would like to have a supervisor there in a shorter amount of time that it takes them to drive 65 miles from Point Arena or through the pass from Willits over, another hour drive going that direction. So we're just saying that it would be more ideal for you to not over-rely on technology, to think that a phone call is going to handle some of those incidents is not realistic. A supervisor on scene gets a sense of what's going on. He hears what victims are saying. He hears what suspects are saying. He sees what the actions are of the officer, and that's why he's a supervisor, as he gets the whole picture.
Understood, and I'm not disagreeing with you at all, but I'm just clarifying that by direct supervision, you actually mean that the supervisor would be available to respond to the scene in a reasonable amount of time.
Yes.
Thank you.
Yes. Another area that we talked about, span of control, was the Comet unit. Again, these guys, when we did a analysis of what they did, these guys knocked the ball out of the park. They had, I believe, 620,000 plants last year, which is just phenomenal. But it's two guys. It's a span of control of 1-to-1, a sergeant and one deputy sheriff. Your other investigative, your general investigative pool has, I believe, a 1-to-7 span of control, and that's not inordinate. However, because of low staffing levels, and keeping in mind that all of this is systemic, all of these systems touch each other and have an impact. So you have a higher level of crime that your general investigations pool is dealing with. In the case of Mendocino County, they have their patrol officers handling burglary follow-up. That is atypical, and for a number of reasons. So that means that your patrol officer or your investigative officers, your detectives, are handling more serious crimes, and their case workload has gone up. So when you look at span of control, that's one of the factors that requires a lower span of control, is when you have a higher degree of difficulty and complexity, and that's what's going on in the general investigative pool. So if you were to take this Comet sergeant, put him over, and the deputy, and put them into the general pool, when they had Comet things to do, they could do those things. Now, the Comet unit, when I say he is supervising 1-to-1, that is, again, his daily activity. But he's also, at times, doing big operations, like the big operation you just had here, a month or two ago. So, of course, during that time, he's supervising a lot of people. But that's not his day-to-day function. Those are just temporary assignments. By putting him back in the general investigative pool, it wouldn't preclude him from doing those. He could still do those types of operations, supervise those people, and pull in the resources they need when they have to do a large operation. But day to day, he could help take on the responsibility of supervising more people, and instead of just one and a program. And that's our professional opinion on it. And then the professional standards unit. That's another one that had a low span of control. Professional standards unit, how you define that is very diverse around different organizations. It typically has internal affairs inside of it, which this professional standards unit does have. Sometimes it has some of the hiring responsibilities, background investigations, and so forth. And in the case here, of course, the 9.31 compliance program. But it's still a very low span of control. And so our concern was that this is someone who seems to be supervising more of a program than people. And when you have the need in other places, this might be another area that there could be a realignment of some kind that would give you better supervision in the field. Then animal control. Again, the sheriff's office and his staff do a great job at animal control. But it's another position where it's a very low span of control, and we think it might even be kind of a distraction from his primary responsibilities. Not an indictment on how they do the job, just another area where there's consideration should be given on maybe another supervisor that could go into an area of need. and we talked about Fort Bragg and investigations. Any questions on those? Patrol coverage, beat to staffing ratios. This is a tough nut to crack here, and calls for service staffing ratios. I'll start with the first one there. And the reason it's a tough nut to crack here is because this really was not a staffing study. To give you a definitive hard number on how many people that you want per position all around this department would require a very focused staffing study. And what those include would be activity logs, for example. We would distribute activity logs to every employee in the department and have them track what they do over time in 30-minute or 60-minute increments for 60 to 90 days. And at the end, we would compile that data, and that would just be one variable that we would use. Other variables, and one that we rely heavily on, are response times. How long does it take a deputy sheriff to get a call, it goes through the system and dispatch, and then they get on scene to that call? And this is where the unique, diverse geography of your county, which makes it a great place, also makes it a big challenge, is you have small population centers in certain areas that require services. But sometimes it takes a really long time to get there. We did not have access to that data in this case because the computer system just doesn't provide a good look of how long it takes to get to calls. And calls are typically broken down into priorities. So a priority 1 call, of course, being the most serious, some kind of an in-progress violent crime or potentially violent crime, down to, somebody stole a piece of my mail and I don't know who that is. So response times are typically looked at within those priorities, 1 through 4 in most cases. We just didn't have access to that data to make these staffing ratio determinations.
Can I jump in there, David?
You can.
One of the things about when your new computer system's in, if that will give the sheriff accurate response times, accurate queue times. Queue times is how long a dispatcher has to hold the call before they send a deputy sheriff, and then the travel time, how long it takes. Those are going to be very valuable for trying to determine adequate staffing. The only thing I'd say about that is that adequate staffing for Covelo may not be the same as adequate staffing for the outer limits of Ukiah. And so when that data is available, it is something that you guys should certainly use heavily, but also keep that in mind that it's just not going to be the same for those areas. But I think your new computer system, that's going to be a very valuable tool for you to have. And frankly, the computer system we have now would not give us adequate data. We tried to get it.
There is another factor we look at, and it's not looked at in isolation, though. And it's for a number of reasons, too. So we mentioned in the report here that one thing that you can do to look at staffing is to apply a model where you determine it's 5.6 to 5.9 people per beat. There is essentially 9 or 10 beats in this county. I know that they would like to staff that many beats if they could. And the way you come up to this 5.6 or 5.9, that range, is that there's 2,080 hours that an employee can work. If you take into account their vacation time, sick leave, training time, all those kinds of things, most employees work 1,600 to 1,700 hours. If you just do the simple math on that, then it comes out to cover a beat, which is kind of like a fixed post, then you have to cover it 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, 365 days a year. It comes out to that ratio of 5.6 to 5.9. And that spread and that ratio depends on the staffing plan that you apply to it. 5/8s, 4/10s, 3/12s, etc. So using that spread, or using that number, you would come out somewhere around 50 deputy sheriffs. And right now, I say right now, as of the time when we gathered the information, I don't know if it's exactly the same today, it was 32. Now, again, we would never apply that model in isolation, and especially in a county like this. You also have beats that are resident deputies, and you're not going to have 5.6 deputy sheriffs cover a resident deputy beat. It's just not necessary. So that obviously is going to lower your number back towards your 32. But I don't think that there's any model in totality that we could apply to say that the sheriff has all the deputy sheriffs he needs to cover his beats. We can't say definitively what that number is because we don't have all the data, and it wouldn't be fair to speculate on that, but we don't see that we're anywhere that he would have all the needs that he has in patrol. Calls for service for staffing ratios. Direct your attention to page 53. And again, you know, it's one thing just to show hard numbers here and statistics. It's another thing to apply it to real life situations. But you look at the central sector, 50% of the calls come in there, and they have 48% of the staff. That's, you know, about as close as you can get. The north sector has 23% of the calls and 33% of the staff. Fort Bragg, 27 and 20. Now those look like a pretty significant spread. There might be very significant reasons for this staffing and calls for service, and again from geography standpoints. But we bring attention to it because we think there should be consideration. We don't know that the sheriff has seen that particular number showing a percent of staff versus calls for service. So at least it draws his attention to, hey, is this something that I need to look at and maybe make some changes on?
Supervisor Hamburg has a question.
Yeah, there's one thing I noted on page 53 that is certainly a concern to me, and I'm sure it's a concern to the sheriff as well. Talking about the practice of demoting the most junior sergeants and laying off the most junior deputies for cutbacks is common. The consequence of this was that the junior officers and sergeants were all from Fort Bragg, and the coast sector mandatory transfers were not made to fill the vacancies, leaving the coast sector short of management, supervision, and patrol deputies. I mean, that shows up actually throughout your report. And, when you look at the calls for service versus the staffing, the coast, comes out kind of shy, does come out shy compared to the other two sectors. So, I mean, I don't know how the sheriff is going to deal with the things that are raised in this report, but that's certainly something that as a coastal supervisor, I would like to see some kind of a plan to redress that issue.
We agree, and like you said, it was in several areas of the report. One of the areas that we did address it is in recruitment. And one of the things that's very challenging for a place like Fort Bragg, and again, Steve and I have experienced it ourselves in other places. We're like in Lake Tahoe, for example, and it's very similar in that it's a great place to visit. It's a hard place to raise a family. And so to recruit for some of those areas sometimes is very challenging. And so often it is the junior deputies that populate your workforce there. And so when the layoffs come in, you have no choice because of civil service rules that's where they come from.
Yep.
And our comment really is this is the net effect of it. And so when you make decisions on layoffs and those kinds of things, you should have all of the information that there's a net effect in some of these areas that's going to have a consequence where you have a hard time recruiting. We did throw in, I think, 4 different points to help recruit over there, if you did, that we have found successful in other areas as well.
And I may have a comment on that. Those 4 points we put in there are actually tried and true. I mean, think about something. You don't need, hundreds of deputies over there, but if you can find those high school students that have an interest in that and mentor them and bring them along and maybe even help them in college and stuff like that, where they want to live near their parents, they want to live where they've been raised. You can find people that want to live there, that have the house, that have the family, and that's where it's going to be. But there has to be an effort to make that happen.
And I would add, it's kind of like the Pee Wee Football League. If there's any high school football fans here, the Pee Wee Football League is great for little kids, but the high school coaches are the one that put that on. They're preparing all those kids for high school, and it's the same thing you do here. You recruit early and find the kids that have an interest in law enforcement from that community. And using this model, I hired 43 deputy sheriffs in 1 year when we had a big crunch. So like I said, it's tried and true, and it does help. It's not going to be the panacea for everything that's an issue here, but I think it'll help.
Yeah, I thought those were very interesting suggestions, and also the suggestions you made regarding using volunteer staff, people out of the communities, and I mean, you also pointed out that it takes people to make those programs happen, and in an environment where we're so short of people. But I did like that you pointed out ways to expand the reach of our law enforcement officers by some of these methods that have been used successfully in other venues.
Yeah, I was going to say there is an upfront cost in the care and feeding of volunteers. There just is. But the long-term, down-the-road effect is it really bolsters your organization. And I'd bring to light the Rockland PD Police Department, for example. They have an incredible, tremendous volunteer program. It's not a large department, but they have over 100 volunteers that go out and do different things for them and really maximizes their effectiveness in the community.
Yeah.
Steve, did you have a comment on that?
I think the only thing I wanted to comment on this this thing too is that in our report, and Dave will address this later, we recommend a criminal justice policy committee to help make some of the decisions. When a decision is made to a position needs to be reduced or a sergeant position needs to be reduced, it can't happen quickly in my mind. It has to have some planning as far as, okay, these 2 junior people are going to come from the coast, which is going to, again, put us well below staffing. And it can't happen like a knee-jerk. It has to, they can't be kind of booted out, so to speak, until there's adequate coverage there. And that's what I think is part of the problem is that criminal justice policy committee or the ad hoc committee or whatever it is, talking about the consequences of cuts, I think is an important thing. So I just wanted to mention that too. It's not just all on the sheriff to try to fill those positions. It's on all of you to try to say, okay, here's our problem. We need to cut 2 positions. They're both going to come from Fort Bragg. How are we going to fill that hole, that void?
Do either of you have experience in the HR realm that would address it from the actual position allocation standpoint? In other words, if we have resident deputies or we have the coastal sector with unique needs, is there a way to work with your HR department to come up with specific categories for those placements so they're not in the same stream of under civil service? Do you know what I'm getting at? In other words, that would help you if you could come up with a plan, and I realize there's complexities to that, and maybe it's not really all that simple, but is there a way to do that through your HR development process to have specific categories for those positions so they're not subject to the typical bumping?
I have a thought on that, and the thought might be, and again, is where you really see this a lot of times is the need for women in correctional institutions. So you do a woman-only test, so you're bending the rules for a specific need. It might be possible to do a coast-only deputy sheriff test, so that the people that take that test know where they're going, and so on. And they almost can, maybe you can probably have them sign up for a certain duration. We were having a problem at our Tahoe station where everybody wanted to come to Auburn because of the cost of living, and we could not allow them. So we were looking at contracts that if you came on board, you were signing a contract, you were going to stay at Tahoe for a period of time. That might not be the best way to do it, but it might be something to look at as far as a focused testing for the coast. That's not going to save. There's still going to be the junior people, though. That's the problem.
Sure.
Yeah.
Sure.
The idealistic goal here has to be to find people that want to live there, they want to be there, their families there, and so on.
Thank you.
Okay, I think I'm going to move on now to morale, and we brought this subject up because morale is a significant issue here. I got to tell you, and I'll go through some of these points here. Some of these issues are in every organization every day, and they don't go away. So we're not saying that these are necessarily unique to Mendocino County, but they are, in fact, some of the things that are here. I think one of the things that we have found here and in other organizations is everything's unsettled right now in the state government and federal government, but especially in budgets and those kinds of things. The staff here has experienced a 10% pay cut, and there's just what's going to happen with my retirement? Am I going to have to take another cut? Am I going to get laid off? And all of that unsettled issues in their lives creates morale issues. So then other things, are like a piece of sand under the burr, into the saddle, a burr under the saddle. So it's just some of those things are starting to pile up a little bit. And I think the biggest one is there's a lot of unsettled issues that are going on here. Potential effects, we addressed this in obviously in greater detail, and we didn't have the time or resources to say that the morale is affecting these specifically in your county. These are based on responses from a study that was done in generally on morale issues. And I think I want to bring up one more thing about deputy sheriffs I think that should be made known. It's not that a deputy sheriff gets in a shooting every day, so it's not that he's in a combat zone or there's a terrorist behind every tree. However, almost every professional contact that they have, if there are calls for service, they make a traffic stop, there is friction there, and there is a low-grade stress. And so it's a long-term, low-grade, constant stress that deputy sheriffs are under. And one of the things that they're required to do is be hyper-alert. They have to be. when you approach a car for running a stop sign, you have to be hyper alert that they weren't running from a bank robbery or something like that you know nothing about. So that hyper alertness, this low grade stress that they're under all the time, you're not even counting the incidents, the major incidents, is an effect. And when you add low morale, is it the tipping point? Is it the thing that just makes it one more thing that makes it very difficult? And some of the effects of that can be absenteeism, low productivity, a high turnover, community complaints, and increased use of force, which actually relates back to inadequate supervision. And then sworn personnel suicides. We put that in because it was in the study material, the resource material that we discovered on this. There's no one is saying that low morale is the single factor of personnel suicides. It can just be one of the factors that is the tipping point for it. This issue here, we brought this issue forward.
Supervisor Hamburg has a comment.
Madam Chair, the other thing that shows up in the report many times is the issue in the department of the 931 and the whole marijuana program and the marijuana culture and the relationship between that and the homicide rate. But as we're talking about morale, I don't want to not discuss that because it's a difficult issue. It's a very real issue, and it definitely didn't start with this administration. It goes back many, many, many years. But to consider it as something that is a significant contributor, as you portray in your report, a significant contributor to morale issues within the department, I think it's something that the board and the public should be aware of. I mean, this is real, and I don't know if there are ways that I don't know if there's something we should be doing about it, or if this is just the way it is. But I think. I just had to mention it because it is so prominent in your report, and I'm sure members of the public are going to read this report and they're going to see the same thing. Perhaps the sheriff will want to say something about it, or maybe there's just, not a lot to say. But this is an ongoing issue in our community and something that is very real.
We wouldn't disagree with you, and that is probably one of the very unique things about Mendocino County. Very unique. It's not, none of those were meant as an indictment on the sheriff or how he runs his department.
Yeah, it didn't come across that way.
We think he does a fine job. He's a fine man. But we would feel very remiss if we did not mention it in the report, in the places it was mentioned, because it was concerns in the areas that we mentioned it. So for you to mention it, that's obviously part of the political process that you guys have to deal with, and it's not necessarily commentary on our part, it's just reporting commentary from other people.
Supervisor Pinchas.
Well, as a professional, I think that's one of the problems we have with the whole marijuana industry in this county. You just said with Mendocino County, it's unique to this area. Marijuana is not unique to Mendocino County. Marijuana is not even unique to all 58 counties in California. But somehow we've had the spotlight in the last almost 40 years now on Mendocino County. And frankly, it's still, what the feds are doing, the spotlight is still on Mendocino County. I don't really understand it, because certainly marijuana is not unique to only Mendocino County. I mean, it's the medical marijuana issue, I believe it's legal in 15 states now. So we keep coming back to, Mendocino County, it's like we're treating things differently. We're treating things kind of on the ground. Our sheriff, who does a wonderful job trying to weave in and out of the federal and state and local medicine ordinances and all that, is trying to weave in out of the process. We're attempting to try to deal with what's on the ground. Other agencies above us, federal agencies, don't even deal with what's on the ground. But to say that we're unique, we're not unique. The only portion we're unique is we're trying to deal with what's happening on the ground every day out there in people's homes and backyards and everything. And that's, do we take criticism for it? Are we downgraded for that? I don't know. But it's kind of discouraging to me. I've lived here all my life and watched this totally evolve. And we're still at the forefront and the spotlight of what's going on. And it's very, first of all, it's very unfair to our citizenry in Mendocino County. And frankly, it's very unfair and hurts the morale of our law enforcement personnel in this county. And that's not in the study, that's just my opinion.
I would just have to say our comment on unique is that 9.31 is unique, and I think Sheriff or Supervisor Hamburg mentioned that that some of this is related to 9.31, and so our reference is that that's the part of the marijuana issue that is unique here. We've not encountered 9.31 or its variant in other places. Not that it doesn't exist; it's just not been in our experience.
And I think from a unique standpoint also is that, like you said, for forever there's been more of a culture here of marijuana growers and stuff, and especially as the economy, as the fishing industry has gone south and the lumber industry has gone south. Humboldt County, Mendocino County have been known forever as having more of a culture of marijuana growers and the effects of that. And that also adds to that uniqueness. So from a standpoint of the officers, I think one of the things that officers go to academy. Your officers probably went to Sacramento or they went to the Bay Area, whatever, and they were there as part of a large officer community learning their lesson. And then they learned a certain way. And when they are part of a community that maybe takes a little different view on the enforcement of marijuana laws and maybe a little more lenient view of growers and stuff like that, it hurts their feeling that they are somehow not enforcing those laws, not being as hard as they were taught to be at the academy and stuff like that. And I think that's a little bit of that of that morale for them. So I think that's why when we talk about Mendocino County being unique, there's some unique effects on the officers and their view of what law enforcement should be and stuff like that, because it is unique.
But it should be understood by our sworn officers that that these policies are made by the part of county government that is responsible for creating these laws. And it's their job, and I know Sheriff Allman appreciates this and takes this attitude. It's up to the Sheriff's Department to enforce the laws as they are, basically set forth by this body. Isn't that true? I mean, we can't promulgate laws that are inconsistent with the state, although we do promulgate laws that are inconsistent with the federal government. I don't know, this is just a very confusing area, and I can understand where deputies would feel like, well, I'm going to enforce the law but which law? And we all know we're just in this very confusing maelstrom where it's just hard, but you do have, and everybody knows this, you have deputies in the county and sergeants and other personnel who think, that what we're doing is realistic and it's compassionate and it works. And we have other sworn personnel who think we're full of baloney and that we're borderline criminals for even promulgating ordinances that are inconsistent with federal law.
And my sense is you're exactly right on one thing, and that's why we talk about it from a morale standpoint. When we're talking about those things that affect morale, sometimes people are confused, and you just mentioned that sometimes some of the sworn staff are kind of confused. I think that causes a little bit of that morale. It's an issue unique to you guys, and I think the sheriff is doing a good job of dealing with it. It's something for you to be aware of, and that's the main thing in our report. We just wanted to mention in our report that there is, the 9.31 program is kind of unique, and it does cause some issues, and I don't want the word dissension within the department, maybe some disagreement within the department, like you mentioned.
Okay, I think we can move on to the phone-in and mail-in reports. That would include online reporting. We brought this forward because it is, unfortunately, kind of a growing trend in some organizations. For some, it's been around a long time, and in others, they're starting to approach this differently now. And again, it has to do with technology and resources that are available or not available to them. We don't endorse it as a best practice. However, we did address it, and we asked the staff of the typical issues or typical cases that would be brought forward for this type of consideration. We asked the staff what they thought about it. And you can see, obviously, in great detail, how they felt about the different things. So we're just saying that the consideration should be given to that, but that it's a service delivery decision. It is not just a black and white thing. It's part of the threshold that you will put up with and your constituents will put up with. We think best practice is to send somebody to every call that you have the staff to do, but that's not necessarily practical in every case. I think this brings us to the Criminal Justice Policy Committee that Steve talked about. I don't recall which page number that is. I don't see it on here, but I think it's in the 70s.
It's the end.
Towards the end there, there's an 80s. In essence, we believe that this county would benefit from a criminal justice policy committee instead of just an ad hoc committee when some of these issues come up. It's page 94. Thank you, Steve. Page 93 actually describes it, and page 94 depicts it. Yeah, we think you would benefit from having a permanent criminal justice policy committee. And it helps define public safety goals and objectives as a group, and it brings understanding to systemic effects of policy decisions. There's been a number of examples, I think, that you can see. We have found some at low levels and some at higher levels as well. One low-level example where this may have come into play, for example, was a line staff person in one of the stations felt like if there was a disposition form created or used at the courts, whenever a case comes before the courts, and they're going to conclude a case, they know the disposition of that case and what can be done with evidence. It can be disposed of. All the box they really have to check is it can be disposed of legally. The evidence clerks then know and what kind of evidence based on that case, how that can be dispersed. It can go back to the victim, the suspect, be destroyed, or be sold at auction even. So you have these property rooms that are just stuffed to the gills with evidence. They're just packed full. But if a clerk in the court checked the box and that form, the goldenrod copy, went to the evidence clerk, then they could say, oh, I can dispose of that evidence, and now I can start to clear out this room. It actually could generate revenue through some of the auction processes that are available out there, and I'm sure the sheriff takes advantage of that now, but he could take more advantage of it. I use that as an example because that line-level clerk sent it to a line-level clerk at the courts and who said, no, we can't do that. An issue comes before the Criminal Justice Policy Committee. All the players are there. They can know how it affects the probation department, the courts, the district attorneys, the sheriff's department, etc. So those are the kinds of issues. That's just one example. Another one, of course, is the jail. The jail is huge in this Criminal Justice Policy Committee issue. How many beds? If you have 100 empty beds, is that really the best practices for holding people accountable in your county? Of course, you can't, you don't want to have too many with federal consent decrees that come along and those kinds of things. So you can help actually meter and balance your jail populations with this committee as well, because all those systems are connected. And then finally, I would say it can have an effect in the budget process. It's not necessarily related to the budget process. However, those relationships that are formed, because everybody's looking at those objectives and goals as a group, not just the sheriff looking at his goals, not just the probation chief and the DA, and they're not in isolation. They're really working on those goals together. And when they're working those goals together in these policy committee meetings, then they can continue those relationships into the budget process.
And one more comment on that is it's like the Revolutionary War where they said, we'll certainly hang together or we'll all hang separately. When you have this group here of people making decisions on things as a group, it really is actually a better way of making decisions because of all the interplay. Probation department, sheriff's department, court stuff, all affect each other. So making these decisions as a group is a much better way to go.
And the model on page 94 is one model. We just want to offer you a model that you can consider. You can modify it any way that works best for you, of course.
Would you have any thoughts on sort of the interface between this or the mirroring of this and the AB 109 actions? And you haven't had enough time to really get into other municipalities that are going down this path, but I see that there's definitely some similarity between your proposal of Criminal Justice Policy Committee and where we are with the AB 109 process.
I think Steve's probably best equipped to answer that, but that's the bulk of our work that's coming down the road, are those studies.
As an example, you'll notice in this thing there's basically 3 different groups there. And you get down there, the Criminal Justice Working Group, and then right above that, the Criminal Justice Advisory Committee. You right now, I'm sure, have a committee and have in place, probably with Captain Pierce involved, for deciding how this whole realignment is going to work. That's a perfect example of that committee making a report to the Criminal Justice Policy Committee for implementation, but the Policy Committee would make that decision.
Perfect example. Then I think we'll move on here, winding down here. Alarm ordinance. That was, somebody mentioned that you already have an alarm ordinance.
Dispatcher, we're unaware of that because that was a question of the dispatch supervisors, and so we may have some confusion there. But the bottom line is, it obviously, is apparently not applied very much. And that's just a small little thing saying false alarms are a big problem. And sometimes false alarms are a big problem because people just don't take care of their alarms because there's no consequences for their alarm going off every week. So having an alarm ordinance, and it's not to make money or revenue, and it's not to punish people, it's to have them be more understanding of keeping their alarm in good working order.
Well, of course, the consequence is a drain on resources from the sheriff's department, and dispatch calls and deputy sheriffs, dispatchers, everybody. There is a consequence for that, and so you can try to implement a false alarm reduction program, and you can do that in-house. It's setting it up is a monster. It's difficult, very challenging, and then you have to have somebody involved who monitors that. Another option for you is to consider outsourcing it. And we just threw out just one of many companies that will come in. They will implement the program. You have to have the ordinance in place, of course, but they'll implement the program for you for a fee. For one agency, they came in, and it was an agency larger than Mendocino County and different in geography, but they estimated $700,000 that they would recuperate for the sheriff's department that would help offset some of these costs. So, of course, that probably wouldn't be the case here, but we just bring that forward to you, that's an option for you to look at.
And I want to emphasize one thing. In talking with your dispatch supervisors, and I think you have, first of all, across the board, sheriff's folks are just really dedicated. The dispatch folks seem just extremely dedicated, but they also sometimes feel overmatched. And things like this, getting rid of things, having the people have alarms that were not continually malfunctioning and causing calls come to them and cutting down their workload, I think that they would be happy to be involved in helping put together a program like that.
Dispatch coverage, really we saw there's for the most part, you have very good dispatch coverage except for this one period of time, and it's just really one position. And for this period of time, this 4-hour block, I believe it is, there's one dispatcher on. And there are some issues with that. There's some challenges and problems with that. If you have one dispatcher on, there's really should be a call taker and a dispatcher. So a call comes in, there's one person sitting at the desk. And if it's an emergency or critical call, a call taker will forward that information to the dispatcher who gets the units rolling, but stay on the phone with that person. As it stands right now, because of the shortage in dispatch, that call comes in. There's not only is that the only dispatcher on during that period of time, there's no one on patrol for part of that period of time. There's no one. So they have to call somebody out. So now the dispatcher has to leave the critical incident to work on getting somebody called out and respond to that incident, and there's a disconnect there. And I don't mean necessarily, that they're disconnected, but there's a disconnect in the information and the information flow that could be critical. I could play tapes for you of incidents where the dispatcher's on the phone and they hear the gunshots in the background. That's the kind of stuff that can occur while this dispatcher might be over here. And that's information that maybe the deputy sheriff, when he responds, doesn't have because the dispatcher wasn't on the call taker part of it. So we think this is a significant issue, but it's just the one position. Would you agree?
I agree.
Another part of the coverage here was the supervisors, and again, we don't know all of the issues involved with this, other than when you just look at the schedule, the supervisors overlapped in such a way that we thought that there could be a better proportion or balancing of how they were shifted, how they the coverage that they provide. We could have better supervision for more people instead of having the overlap of the supervisors.
And I'll cover that a bit more. That time period that is where there's only one dispatcher on, one of the ways to lessen that amount of time was to have one of the supervisors coming in at 6 o'clock in the morning. We are big on supervisors being there when people are there and when people they're having to deal with from a supervisor standpoint are there. Between 6 and 8 in the morning, they're providing that coverage, but they're not doing that job of supervision. So we just think that a regular dispatcher, a non-supervised position, should be shifted back into those off hours rather than a supervisor covering them. So that's very simplistically what we're talking about.
Then budget communication. I mentioned somewhere the possibility of a budget workshop. But then I interviewed some of the CEO staff. They described the last budget cycle that you had, which was not typical of some of the previous ones. And the budget workshop was described. So in essence, last year's process was pretty much a budget workshop, which we advocate. And we think it should continue this process, of course. And we've already mentioned the Criminal Justice Policy Committee and how that can interplay with your budget process, and we think that that's important for you to do. And we hope that this study helps all involved understand the operations, issues, and challenges related to law enforcement. It is a unique business. It's not military and it's not civilian. It's a kind of a paramilitary thing, and there are some unique issues here, and we hope that we've covered a lot of those things so there's a greater understanding of all the people involved, of the challenges and the mission that the sheriff has here.
And I would like one last thing. I was very impressed with all the folks, I mean all the folks that we interviewed in this whole process. There are just a bunch of dedicated, intelligent people here, which it really, I think it bodes well for Mendocino County as you go through these difficult times and budgets and stuff like that. But certainly anything that we've put in here, we just feel that you have the people and the will to make it everything as the best it can be.
Questions from board members at this point? Okay, let's go next to the sheriff. Sheriff Hama, would you like to comment? And then we'll go to public comment after that.
Thank you. And thank you, David Harris, Steve Reeder, for providing the report. What we initially had asked for is a snapshot of the sheriff's office efficiencies and inefficiencies, and I think that by and large we received what we were looking for. Three professionals coming in, talking, looking, using your education and more importantly your experience, and seeing what we're doing, if it's right, if it's wrong, and so forth. I appreciate you understanding that the diversity of Mendocino County. We could have a 10-hour session describing the diversity of Mendocino County, but we'll all save us from that. That usually actually happens at this very podium, and it's not something that we shy away from. We're actually very proud of our diversity. That people in this county sometimes march to a beat of a different drummer, and it's allowed us to go to programs such as 9.31 that goes where no other government has gone before, and we're trying to get solutions so we can focus on other issues that we desperately need to focus on. And I look forward to the day where we can focus on the issues that need to be focused on, such as methamphetamine and domestic violence. To the board, I thank you for allowing this consulting agency to come in and take the snapshot, because it's brought new information to the sheriff's office, which we plan on investigating and finding out if this is someplace we want to go to. But it's also reaffirmed some of the thoughts that the sheriff's office has been saying long before my name was ever seen in this county. But said we could go back to Reno Bartolome, I'm sure, and say that there comes a time that the Board of Supervisors and the sheriff's office must work as a team to provide the adequate public safety that the citizens not only desire and deserve, but they also pay for. And I'm looking forward to being sheriff when budgetary items are not the only issue that we deal with. We deal with more important issues that allow us to improve the quality of life that we all decided to either move to Mendocino County and enjoy, or if our family raised us here, we made a conscious decision to stay in Mendocino County because we approved of our quality of life here. I think that as we go through this and we look at the things that could improve the overall quality of life and efficiency of the sheriff's office, one thing comes to mind at every page of this, and that's the employees we have right now are giving 100%. And to those employees, I of course say thank you, and I'm sure that the board says thank you to those employees also. But it's time to send in a few reinforcements. It's time to allow at least 2 dispatchers to be on duty at a time where if one of them needs to go to the restroom, they can go to the restroom and not have to worry about if the phone's going to ring in that short time block. It's time that we tell our partners, our Willis Police Departments, our Fort Bragg Police Departments, and Ukiah Police Departments, that the Sheriff's Office is here to help you as much as you're helping us, because they do help us immensely. And we take advantage of all the services that the local law enforcement agencies and the state agencies have to offer. as we go through this, I would ask you, and I'm sure that the public's going to go through this and say, well, what about this and what about that? I would ask that we digest this in the same way it was given to us, as a whole. And instead of saying, well, let's do this, please remember that for every action there's an equal reaction. And for things such as animal control, well, let's give animal control back to animal care. There's a huge reaction to that. And right now, the Sheriff's Office is very proud of the fact that our citizen complaints on animal control has almost plummeted to a 0 level, because we do have the efficient animal control officers who are out there doing their jobs every day. So I appreciate the opportunity to have this snapshot. I've been asking for this for 3 years now, and it's been delivered. And so now it's up to the Sheriff's Office, and it's up to me personally to set a map of our course of where we're going to go on this. And I would be remiss if I walked away from here without saying that one of the next things you're going to hear from me is to say we need to hire basic boots on the ground to go to serve your constituents. I need to return to 24-hour patrol in the Ukiah, Sentinel Valley, Potter Valley, Redwood Valley. We need to get to that point. It will take 3 deputy sheriffs for us to get to 24-hour patrol back in the central area. We need 3 more deputies on the coast. We need to have those deputies be available to respond to Point Arena to provide backup. And I, of course, need 1 more dispatcher. We're as much as they would say we need to have 50 deputies, you're not hearing me say we need to hear 50 deputies, because I know as well as you the budgetary constraints that we're under. However, we have to deliver service to the citizenry. We have to say when there's a felony that there's people in a safe car that are responding to that felony that can take care of that problem. And that's where you're going to hear me for the next 6 months. There's things in here that obviously you're going to say, well, gee, the sheriff's not very happy with that. And you're probably right. I'm not very happy with that. However, this is a fair snapshot. And this wasn't done for my benefit or for your benefit. This is done for the benefit of the citizenry to see this is where the sheriff's office is, and hopefully where the sheriff's office is going to go. So to Harris & Harris Consulting, I appreciate what you've done with this. I believe that it was money well spent. To the board, this is not, my obligation to you is this is not a notebook that's going to gather dust. This is a notebook that we're going to work together on, and I would hope that the ad hoc committee either could remain the same or at least will continue to have at least 2 members of this board look together. And let's set some goals. Let's set a 6-month, 12-month, 18-month goal to say, are we really going to go to where we think we need to go to deliver what I believe is a core basic service that local government should give its citizenry. Thank you.
Thank you, Sheriff. Let's go now to public comment on this item. Anyone wishing to address the board under public comment for this agenda item, please come forward. Okay, seeing none, we'll return to the board. Any questions, comments from board members at this point? Supervisor McCowan.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Well, I would just like to thank the consultants for the effort they put into this. Given the relatively limited resources we had available for the study, I think you did an exceptional job, and we did get a lot of bang for the buck here. And certainly one thing the report does, and this is more just a personal comment, not directed at you gentlemen, but I think the report certainly provides the factual basis to refute a lot of the statements that we've heard over the last couple of years that the sheriff's office has somehow been exempt from cuts as we have struggled to balance the budget and still provide services. And so anyone that reads this report all the way through will understand quite clearly that the sheriff's office has essentially been decimated in terms of staffing if you look at what the desired level of service would be. And the problems that are highlighted, many of them flow directly from the lack of adequate staffing. And I'm not advocating that we go up to what the optimum would be, because we have to balance our efforts there with available resources. But out of the 5 top positions in the sheriff's office, 2 of them are vacant. So the sheriff's office has been operating without an undersheriff and without an administrative captain. And then that has resulted in some of the concerns identified by the consultants regarding span of control and chain of command. And then, of course, we've brought out the issues of lack of 24/7 coverage in the central area, understaffing on the coast, and you know, that's the reality of the situation. So I don't know how anyone can fairly say that the sheriff office has not suffered cuts along with everyone else. And what it also brings out here is that there are opportunities for efficiencies that hopefully can be implemented going forward. So even though we don't have the desired level of resources to devote to the sheriff's office, there probably are some areas where changes could be made that could result in more efficient delivery of service or more efficient use of the resources. And I certainly look forward to seeing the board and the sheriff and the executive office all work together in a collaborative way to try and implement some of these suggestions. And so I believe I'm in favor of the sheriff's suggestion that the ad hoc committee continue. I think that provides a good avenue for working together on these issues. I certainly don't think it'd be efficient to do it all at the board level here. So thank you.
Surely, Supervisor Pinches.
Well, first of all, I didn't support paying for this, or going forward with this study, but I will admit that it's probably a better study than our $100,000 road study. It was done in the mid-90s was about. It's all about recommendations, but if the sheriff says it's a benefit to him, then I guess that's the real value, because the sheriff has total control over the management and operations of the sheriff and jail budget operations, period. We can tell him our wants and what we'd like to see, but it's ultimately up to him. And as far as the policy committee, we do have a policy committee in this county. It's called the voters. They elect our sheriff and district attorney every 4 years, so they're really setting policy there, you know. And I don't know how much our sheriff or district attorney would want to buy into a bunch of appointed members that maybe they have a different view of law enforcement than the committee members. So I don't see that going anywhere. But you know the reality of it is the monetary side of it. I mean, we can all, if coming up with more, you know, a better way to run any department, whether it's Health and Human Services or any department, the treasurer's office or the assessor's office, was all about doing a study and said we need this and we need that. It'd really be easy to just do our jobs. But we're going to have a limited amount of revenues, and because we had a fairly good outcome in this last year's budget, and we was absolutely able to replenish a few dollars in our general fund reserve because of some unanticipated revenues. It's kind of this feeling in the air that everything's all good and fine financially. And first of all, you know, if you look what's happening at the state and how they're missing their projections, and it's going to balance the budget coming on down to the county, and same with what's happening at the federal level. I mean, we may be faced in November here with a 25 to 30% reduction in our transportation revenues. I mean, it kind of looks like it's heading that way. So to say that we're going to, I don't want to give the people in Mendocino County a false promise because of this study that the sheriff's going to have the ability to hire more patrol deputies on the coast or inland or any place, because the reality of it is I just don't see the money there. I mean, you know, then we have these larger incidents that happen. We don't like them, but they come along, and they're a budget impact. But I just don't want to give the people, whether it's through this study or any other indication, that happy days are here again, because they're not. I mean, matter of fact, the future of Mendocino County, I don't see any revenue bright spot out there. I see housing assessed valuation, property tax decreasing. I mean, I'd like to say it's different, but it's not, and the indications and projections are not very rosy. And our retirement costs keep going up, and that's the cost of employment of hiring a sheriff or whatever the worker is just keeps going up. So I appreciate the sheriff and his staff for working through in the last 3 years tough budgetary restraints and keeping the department, and everybody admits it's understaffed. No doubt we need more dispatchers or people on the streets, but we didn't have the money, and our sheriff done a tremendous job of working through that and still keeping a level of service up that I feel was, although not the greatest, it almost meet most of our needs. And I just kind of see that direction moving forward in the future, because the problems that we're going to solve in this county, we're going to have to do them without the dollars attached, because the money just is not going to be there. And if we plan like the money's going to be there and it's not there, we're in bigger problems ahead for us than planning on knowing that we're going to have to operate pretty much on what we have right now. And I think we'll have or end up with a better organizational structure. And that don't go to the sheriff's office, but every budget unit we have. But I just don't want to give the people in Mendocino County an indication that the sheriff's going to come forward with a bunch of positions and bring the staffing levels back up to historical or better levels, because I just don't see it in the cards.
Supervisor Hamburg.
Yeah, I mean, I certainly agree with most of what Supervisor Pinches has just laid out. I do want to thank the two of you and the third member of your team. I thought the study was very valuable to me. You know, it gave me a lot of information about the internal workings of the department that I frankly didn't know. Some of it was made me feel really good. Some of it made me feel not so good, but it was all really valuable. You know, $28,000 is not a lot of money to spend for an efficiency audit, but to us, $28,000 is a lot of money these days. You know, every bit of money seems like a lot of money. So I can't actually remember if I voted for or against expending the money, but I certainly didn't expect to get a report that said, you know, hey, you got a pretty good department with a lot of dedicated people. If you just add another 25% staffing, you know, things will run a lot better. And I don't, frankly, as I read it, that's not what I got out of it. I didn't see very much in here where you were saying, you know, everything would work a lot better if you just hire one of these and hire one of these and hire one of these. Mostly what you seemed to be talking about was how to more efficiently utilize the resources that we have. And I'd point particularly to your discussions about span of control and the use of sergeants. We have 16 sergeants, and I mean roughly 16 sergeants, 2 of whom are acting sergeants, I guess, and around 46 deputies. And that doesn't pencil out according to best practices, as you point out, you know, repeatedly. So, you know, the things I really noticed going through the report was OES, the Office of Emergency Services, where you have a sergeant. You point out in the report that there are many jurisdictions where that office is handled by non-sworn personnel, and you particularly suggest, if I remember, that function be given back to the CEO's office. You talked about the animal care function being a distraction to the overall functioning of the department. That's something that I have sympathy with. The morale issues, I know I talked about those earlier, but I'm not sure that those don't need some treatment. I mean, as good as our personnel is, those 90 to 100 people we have working in the department, morale issues detract from productivity. You say it in the report, and anybody who's ever been part of any organization knows that to be the case. So, I mean, if we're just going to kind of gloss over that and pretend it isn't in there, I guess we can do that. But I thought it was pretty glaring. And of course, as a coastal supervisor, I'm very concerned about the issue of junior officers on the coast, and particularly the lack of a sheriff, a sergeant in Fort Bragg. And again, you talk about that as you know, the opportunity to create that within the existing staffing allocation. So, you know, I didn't read this, I guess, the way Supervisor McCowan did, as you know, well, this shows that the sheriff's department's taking a hit. Every department in our county's been taking a hit, and as Johnny just pointed out, we're going to take more hits, not less, as we go forward. And as much as the sheriff's department is the core function of county government, there are other functions of county government that we simply have to continue to carry out. I mean, we have other constitutional duties besides public safety. Even if that's number one, we have a lot more that we have to do to continue to function as a county. So my concern going forward is, you know, is how much dust are we going to let this gather, or are we going to actually look at some of the specifics in it and resolve that we're going to act on them? Because we did spend 28 grand, and we did spend a lot of staff time. And I want to see come back to the board. Well, what do you think about this OES issue? You know, should we leave a sergeant in charge of? Should we leave a sergeant in charge of Comet? You know, should we fold Comet and the task force into the rest of the department? Would that be more efficient? I mean, I want to see the questions that are raised in this audit answered, because I don't want to be a supervisor who was part of a $28,000 study that goes nowhere. So those are my comments.
Thank you, Supervisor. So I think our action is to really, in essence, accept the presentation by Harris & Harris Enterprises. And thank you again, both. I think you did do a really comprehensive job. You really delved into, I think, some difficult issues, and I think you really showed your professionalism and how you framed those in the report. So I really appreciate your efforts. The other aspect of the recommended action was the disbanding of the ad hoc committee. The sheriff recommended continuing that, and Supervisor McCowan, you thought that would be a wise idea. Any other comments in terms of an action to go forward? Supervisor Pinches.
Well, I think Supervisor Hamburg brings up a good point. You know, we spent the money in the study. It's got some good recommendations to it. Are we just going to throw this on the shelf? Or are we going to, I guess my question would be, what is the process? Are we going, I mean, we just got this. I mean, and the sheriff, I'm sure, didn't have it much sooner than we did. But because as I stated earlier, the total, how the department is run is total discretion of our elected sheriff. Because that is statute and law, that's how it stands. I think that we should, at least for the first part, give the sheriff a reasonable amount of time and then let him come forward with the recommendations of change that he support. Because frankly, if we come forward and say, we want the sheriff to change this and this and this, and if he don't like it, it ain't gonna happen. So why don't we recognize the obvious and wait for a reasonable period of time and let the sheriff come work with the CEO's office on issues of, Supervisor Hamburg brought a couple of specifics, but whatever they are, and bring forward and give our sheriff a little time here and let him come forward with some changes, recommendations, or whatever you want to call them, because ultimately he's the guy in charge anyway.
I think, Supervisor, the intention of today was just to have the consultants in front of us present the final report, have a discussion, and not take any specific action.
Yeah, we got plenty of
but
talking.
I think you
there's
raise
plenty
a good,
of talking points here.
Yeah, you raise a good question, and Supervisor, I think Hamburg raised some very good points about, well, what are the next steps if we've spent this money? So the sheriff has proposed keeping the ad hoc in process as just a piece of the discussion. I'll go to the CEO.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I was going to support the recommendation from Sheriff Allman to keep the ad hoc committee going as well, and not to disband the committee. And also, I was thinking, however you would choose, if it was the sheriff and the ad hoc committee that were going to work together to review the recommendations, or whether it's the sheriff, that we just put a timeline on it. You know, that we come back in either 3 months or 6 months with progress and determine which recommendations we would like to, the sheriff would like to implement or not. So either way, I would just ask that we do not disband the ad hoc committee. I think there's a reason to have it. Thank you.
Supervisor Brown.
Thank you, Chair Smith, and I just want to remind this board the administration of the Sheriff's Department is not within our jurisdiction. Budgeting is. I'd like to see the continuation of the ad hoc committee as it presently consists, and go forward in a 3 to 6 month timeline.
Good point.
That's my input.
Thank you. Counsel?
Yeah, if you're going to continue with the ad hoc committee, it'll be important for you to define what you expect from the ad hoc committee, clearly define that, and set a definite time period, because you can't have an ad hoc committee to go on indefinitely and with no stated purpose.
I think the 3 to 6 month time frame is a good one. Supervisor Pinches?
Well, it has to be 3 to 6 months, because there's a lot of, if a lot of these recommendations will take, some of them not necessarily more money, but some of them maybe a switching of budgetary issues and whatnot, even with other departments, like the animal control issue. If that happens, so it needs to be blended in to, for our next year's budget. So, you know, we're already into our second quarter right now, so just as long as it, as Supervisor Hamburg said, doesn't lay gathering dust, we got 8 months now before our next budget cycle, so let's actually no less than that till August. So we need to get working on this ASAP. I mean, months go by pretty quick.
Supervisor McCowan.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I just had one minor point to clarify with Sheriff Allman, and then I thought we might give Sheriff Allman an opportunity to wrap up. The point is on page 26, where it has a chart that shows the sheriff and then the personnel that are shown to be reporting directly to the sheriff. It describes one of them as the 9.31 program sergeant, and I believe that's actually the sergeant in charge of the Professional Standards Bureau, and then 931 program administration is just part of his additional duties.
You're correct, Supervisor.
Thank you. And do you have any last thoughts you'd like to?
I think we're all in agreement that we need to look at the expenditure of every dollar this county spends and make sure it's as efficient as possible. And I'm surely going to be a team player at that table to see if we can improve the service to our citizenry, because that's what the bottom line is. It's really not what you want or what I want. It's how can we make sure the quality of life is improved in this county and our crime rate goes down. It all boils down to that.
Thank you. Supervisor Brown.
Thank you, Chair Smith. And on the description for the ad hoc, I would rather see the sheriff and CEO work on that description and come back at next Tuesday's meeting for approval, maybe just on consent.
A future agenda.
So are we talking about, I guess I'm not clear.
Description of the ad hoc.
Okay, but I'm thinking we're not going to disband this ad hoc. You would like a description of the goal of the ad hoc with a time frame, and the sheriff and I could work on that and bring it back.
Just as
and I could
County
just
Council recommended.
Bring that back in my CEO report, not as a separate agenda item, since we're keeping, okay. Okay. All right.
So we're just removing that from the action today, so we're silent on that piece. Supervisor
That could
Pinches.
be done here. Why don't we just put an implementation of Harris audit study on recommendation? That's what you're going to do, is you're going to implement not all these recommendations, but certainly or change, you know, that's what you're working off as. This is your base study, right? You're going to work off it.
So then, if everyone is in agreement, including Sheriff Allman, then part of the action would be that the ad hoc committee stay in effect for 6 months to review the final Harris study and come back to the board with a review of those recommendations. It's Tom?
Yeah, that's fine. I don't think the motion should be that we're going to accept every recommendation
Right.
and move towards it, but
Right.
to continue to review and investigate our options is something that we're all
Yeah.
willing to do.
And then the ad hoc would come together, the ad hoc would come back to this board with recommendations from the ad hoc committee based on the Harris study. Because really, that's the step that's missing here, the actual time to go through the study.
Sure.
Okay? And then I don't have to come back with another agenda item next week.
But I think the sheriff is correct in saying it's just not going to be an implementation piece. It's going to be a discussion and consideration, and then we'll see what can be agreed to or worked out, what seems feasible, and then bring back those ideas or suggestions. Yeah. Supervisor Hamburg.
Well, it seems to me that prior to any implementation, which I agree, will take, many months, and, Supervisor Pinches suggests that some of these things couldn't be might not be implemented until we've gone through another budget cycle, and we're looking at, a new way of looking at delivering services in the sheriff's department. Not that it would be totally radically different, but some changes. But way before that, and I don't, certainly within a 90-day period, couldn't we get something back from you, Tom, or from you and the committee that is your response to these recommendations? I mean, there's a matrix here, about a 5-page matrix, which lays out findings and recommendations. And I would like to know, I realize this all came out, just a few days ago, but I'm very curious to know your response to these recommendations, because, you're the guy who is there where the rubber meets the road, and, you can look at these recommendations, and I appreciate your acknowledgement that these are very professional men who have put these ideas together, but I want to know what you think of these recommendations.
And I certainly have that opinion.
And I don't want to
certainly
wait 6 months.
And I certainly want to express that to you, Supervisor Hamburg. However, I've had this no longer than you have.
Yeah, I understand.
And before I commit to anything, I want to read this several times. And I want to be quite honest, even though they're the paid consultants, there might be other efficiencies that we could agree upon that aren't even mentioned in here. So
Sure.
I'm not going to commit to a time. I don't think that's a fair question, Supervisor. But I think that with the new board coming on next year, and we're looking at the budget cycle in the third quarter, we start looking at the new 12-11 or 12-13 budget. I think everything's going to come into place quite well. But what I don't want, and let me publicly state this one more time, I don't want anybody to go through this and say, well, let's go along with whatever page 34 is, and I'm just picking a number out of the hat that does this, and ignoring the whole thing. For every action, there's an equal reaction. The sheriff's office has been a team player. We haven't hired or promoted since May of '09. And sometimes it's during the implementation of some of these, there's going to be pressure on the board very directly to say, we have to improve the staffing levels of the sheriff's office for this county. We have to. There's no other option to that. And for every position we take away, whether it's OES or animal control, those are positions that are also fulfilling other duties within the sheriff's office. So I'm not exactly sure what you're asking for. I'm not going to give you a date right now.
Well,
what I'm saying
all
for
I'm
is
asking
let's
for-
digest it and let's get back
Yeah.
probably in January. January is a very good month, and say this is what a good roadmap is.
Well, all I'm suggesting is that within a given amount of time, that we have a report back from the ad hoc committee
We'll do it.
and you that says, here's what we think of this report, just a response to the report. Is that too much to ask?
I appreciate your recommendation, Supervisor.
That can be in the description, Supervisor Hamburg. I think we just discussed
Agreed.
that, and
I think we're all in agreement on
Yeah.
that. Supervisor McCowan.
Thank you, Madam Chair. To County Council, if we're going to reauthorize or redefine the ad hoc committee, I think that will need to come back at least on consent calendar, so it's very clear the board is given that direction.
Yeah, that's fine. You can continue with the ad hoc and just, you could conceivably refine the purpose right now. But if you want to have it clear, you can bring it back next Tuesday and on consent if that'll.
I think we need to
Is that
have
you wanna
that
do?
done.
Yeah.
I'm sorry. but it's...
So would someone like to make the recommended action for accepting the presentation by Harrison Harris?
So moved.
Second?
So you have a motion by Supervisor McCowan, a second by Supervisor Brown. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? Hearing none, passes unanimously. Thank you very much, gentlemen. The chair now announces that agenda item 7B has been canceled. This was the 1:30 planning item on appeal of a coastal commission's decision to deny a coastal development re-subdivision. So that has been canceled, will be rescheduled.
Madam Chair, you might say the reason it was canceled, because they never meet the notification requirements.
Okay. So noted. So the board will now take our lunch recess. We will reconvene into closed session at 1:30, returning to open session to report out of closed session and to continue and finish a few short items of today's business. So we're adjourned until 1:30. The board is returning from lunch recess and followed by closed session, and I will go to council to report out from closed session.
Thank you, Madam Chair. With respect to the labor items, the board provided direction to staff. With respect to the one item, initiation of litigation, the board authorized litigation against Western Surety. The motion was made by Supervisor Hamburg, seconded by Supervisor McCowan, and the vote was unanimous.
Thank you. We'll go now to the Department of Transportation, the director's report. Just accepting the report. Any questions or concerns? Okay, seeing none, we'll go on to supervisors' reports. Item number 8A. Anyone wish to report? Supervisor Brown?
Thank you, Chair Smith. One item off our list is the Ledge Ad Hoc Committee. Ms. Furman reported on that, so I don't believe Supervisor Hamburger, myself, need to say more about that. I did attend by phone the Ad Hoc Committee on the building of a new courthouse. The process is going forward. The second choice of the administration of the courts, which is the Railroad Depot site. I don't know if any of you saw the news article, and actually is the one that will be going forward due to complications of their number one site, which is referred to as the library site. Therefore, they will be in a position to access the funds as one of the projects in the state, because only so many are going to be funded due to state budget. Inland Water and Power Commission met Thursday, what was it, a week ago, and they meet on the second Thursday of every month. And we heard just a verbal report on the study that's going on about the safety of Coyote Dam. And this is being done by Corps of Engineers, and it is a team of Corps' top people across the nation, and they have been here for over 1 week. We will have a report at the upcoming IWPC meeting, I think is November 10th, about their findings. Also, there was a food systems network meeting. Supervisor Hamburg attended with me. This was our county committee meeting the previous week, and that was last Thursday. The previous Thursday, the regional executive committee meets by teleconferencing. It was a great group of individuals that were involved at our county. I don't know how Supervisor Hamburg feels, but I was really enthused with the expertise and especially the majority age of the individuals that were in the room. wasn't the over 60 crowd. We had a great group of enthusiastic adults, young adults. Also, I'd like to announce that there was 4 applications received for the regional coordinator's position. We had 2 applicants from our county, very, very, very excellent candidates. The final selection went to Cliff Pollen. So he'll be coordinating the region. There's going to be approximately $7,000, and that mainly is to do activities or help assist our effort here in this county, and probably Lake County as well. And with that $7,000, we're hoping to perhaps buy some time of Cliff Pollen's time to help us on our efforts, as well as maybe look at other individuals that can do specific duties surrounding the information we need to develop to go further with this effort. And I think that is about it, except I do have the notes. Judith Harwood was our facilitator. She has all the minutes. If you're interested in seeing the results of that meeting, I'd be happy to share them with you.
Great. Other reports? Supervisor?
Question on, you say the library site is off, they eliminated that as far as the courthouse?
Well, I came away from that with a little bit different impression that officially the library site is still the #1 site, but there are a lot of issues with it, with the multiple property owners, and there's multiple sites that have contamination issues.
They didn't eliminate. They were just not looking at that right now to move it forward, is the way I understood it.
And it looks like the depot site is a lot more feasible to be accomplished in the timeline and with the funding that is likely to be available. And yet, the courts may still, administrative office of the courts may still go to the city and say, what more can you do for us in terms of subsidizing the cost of the site? And I think it's still up in the air pending this state working group to make the recommendation on exactly what is going to get funded going forward, because the state, as part of the budget, pulled back over $300 million that had been dedicated to this process. So there's some discussion, are they going to authorize a limited number of projects to go forward, or are they going to use more of the funding to make sure they secure the land so that they can keep those things in play for the future? But I got the impression that's still pretty much up in the air.
Well, if for instance, the railroad, they can only spend so much on property, and they have a limit. The city had it appraised. They're asking more than, they're asking for the appraised price, which is more than the working group is willing to pay for any one property. So there has to be some negotiation with the city of Ukiah on that. With the library site, because of the timeline set forth and being able to secure everything that they need to secure as they move forward, it probably would not have been done within the timeline that is required to meet the funding, because there may be no more future funding. And there's a deadline that you have to be ready in order to compete for the funding that's available.
Well, the only reason I'm asking is because the library site is not only the library site, it's there's some businesses that are in operation. And, you know, the state throws out this as a possible site, and that immediately puts those businesses in the lurch of, you know, do they want to change? Maybe they want to do a little remodel. Maybe they want to change their business plan. And it's like, you know, maybe to keep them up in the air for a period of time is one thing, but if it goes ongoing, you know, it's not really fair to them businesses. They need to know, is this going to be the site or is it not going to be the site? Where the railroad site don't matter, because there's no plans to do anything else with that for the tin, for whatever anyway. But when you're messing with people's business, they tend to change their business plan periodically.
Supervisor McCowan.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And I think the intention is to have things decided, sooner rather than later. With regard to the North Coast Railroad Authority, we have received approval for a loan for $3.8 million from the federal government that would be amortized over 25 years. That's the good news. The bad news is we owe about $5.7 million to the operator of the North Coast Railroad, and the proceeds of that loan will go to pay off a portion of the debt, and then the remainder of the debt will be turned into a note against the Ukiah Depot property that would then be paid off when and if the depot property sells. And the reason that had to be done is because the collateral currently pledged to the operator is having to be transferred as a pledge for the loan that has been secured. So a little bit of musical chairs on collateral. EDFC, Economic Development and Finance Corporation, met, and the current executive director has resigned, so there's been a committee appointed, which Supervisor Hamburg is on, to discuss what EDFC is going to look like going forward. Is it possibly be a merger with another agency, or go out and recruit a new executive director? So that's something we're going to be looking at. Supervisor Brown and I took a tour at Pinoleville looking at creek restoration projects that they've done, and also a bioswale that they have installed that accommodates runoff from the county road system that used to result in frequent flooding in the area. And that's been very successful. So, and they have more creek restoration projects in the works as they're able to get funding for them through grants. The work that we saw was funded through a grant from the North Coast Integrated Regional Water Management Plan Committee, which Chair Smith and I sit on. So,
I got a question back to the railroad. You said that the NCRA got approval of a $3.5 million loan.
$3.18 million.
And they're going to put that up, the railroad, or the depot property up as collateral on that loan?
No, the collateral on the loan will be the rolling stock that NCRA has that currently is pledged to the operator.
What rolling stock does the NCRA have?
I don't have the inventory, but I can get it for you.
$3.5 million worth? So they're going to borrow $3.5 million to pay off.
They look pretty good on paper.
They're going to borrow $3.5 million to pay off a $5 million loan, right?
Well, the math doesn't quite work, but it'll be pledged towards that. It'll pay down that loan or debt. The operator essentially stepped in when NCRA didn't have the resources. The operator stepped in and completed the improvements that were necessary to restore freight service to Windsor.
The NCRA borrowed $30 million.
We don't have time for the whole history.
Borrowed $30 million from the state, which is transportation dollars, and they finally got forgiveness of that, but that didn't give nothing back to transportation. Now, are these $3.5 million, are those transportation funds?
I think they're through the Federal Railroad.
Well, that's transportation dollars, yeah.
But they are intended to be paid back on a 25-year amortization.
My point is, the NCRA has just been a total sieve against our state and federal transportation dollars, and not providing any transportation.
I'm just trying
to keep the board informed. And we all seem to be happy with that.
Okay. The chair reports that the inland and coastal groups for biomass will meet this Friday in Fort Bragg at 10 o'clock, trying to really sort of reconnect our efforts, the inland group having a different process than the coastal group. So that'll be a joint meeting that will take place at 10 a.m. this coming Friday.
And that again is in Fort Bragg.
In Fort Bragg.
Mm-hmm. And where's the location of the meeting?
The location is, I believe, the Fort Bragg Fire Department. Through the rear, parking is in the rear, and Yeah, parking through the rear and you enter through the rear.
Okay.
Pretty easy to
Fine.
find, yeah. Okay, any other reports? Okay, I do believe that we are adjourned.